Back in his past life, he was nothing but a no-name mercenary boss, born way too deep in the gutter to ever sniff the top. Zero talent, zero status, and absolutely zero future. It didn't matter how much blood he spilled on the battlefield. But after biting the dust, he suddenly snaps awake. As the third son of the freak this time around, he is stacked with everything he never had. Pure royal blood god-tier talent and an endless mountain of cash. Fueled by the brutal instincts of a veteran killer, he starts clawing his way back up the food chain. So what actually happens when a guy who started with zilch suddenly holds all the cards? A gun for hire who survives every fight is cheap. The only reason a merc bags the big bucks is because they are literally willing to die for whoever signs the check. The only catch, our guy has to sit through this exact same garbage speech every single day. But hey, it is what it is. That is just the miserable life of a mercenary. Sweeping his eyes over the blood-soaked dirt, he scoffs, muttering about how these snobby nobles are all so painfully predictable. When they need you to bleed for them, they dangle shiny titles and fat estates in your face. But the second the job is done, they ghost you with a million lame excuses. Pivoting back to his current boss, he totally deadpans, saying that the garbage coming out of his mouth right now absolutely takes the cake. I must be hearing things right, he mocks. But the commander-in-chief does not even flinch, flatly stating that his ears work just fine. This dude seriously just told him to go die. Flashing a wicked smirk, our MC asks if the guy's brain is broken. Did he magically forget who he was talking to? The commander stares right back, stating he knows exactly who he is. Jake, the captain of the hounds. Jake barks out a laugh. Well, at least your memory works. Unfazed, the stuck-up noble coldly replies that he didn't realize a mutt like him. Instantly, Jake's hand drops to the dagger strapped to his hip. Let's get one thing straight, he growls. That definitely was not an order. Because if it was, why the hell would you ask some low-life merc to die a glorious death, like I am one of your fancy knights in shining armor? The commander sighs, admitting his words came out a bit too harsh, and offers a stiff apology for the mix-up. He claims he just needs him for one final, desperate gig. They both knew the brutal truth. After taking so many massive losses, their entire army was absolutely doomed to crumble. The backstabbing traitors had fully turned their swords against the very people protecting this turf. They were literally breathing down the Crawford family's necks, cutting off every single escape route. Letting out a heavy sigh, our guy shrugs. Considering how totally messed up the situation was, in his head, the math was simple. It was officially time for him to dip before things got any uglier. If a guy with the most cracked stats in the whole empire was talking like this, they were definitely in deep trouble. And yet, for a stuck-up noble, he was shockingly rational. Honestly, kind of a bummer it had to end like this. But business is business. This was his final run. Amidst all this insane chaos, Jake assumed he just needed him to carve out a getaway path. If that was the whole deal, he would wrap it up, secure the bag, and vanish. But then the commander drops the bomb. The mission is dead simple at dawn. Those scumbag traitors are going all in with a massive siege. He wants Jake standing right beside him, acting as a human meat shield, to stall the enemy just long enough for their lord to skirt. And if that fails, fight until his lungs give out and he drops dead. In exchange, the noble tosses him a pouch with the final payout. Peeking inside a mana stone that massive could easily fund an entire squad for 3 solid years. Furious Jake violently slaps the priceless stone right out of the noble's hands. Startled, the commander demands to know what his problem is. Jake snaps back. I should be asking you that. Do I look like a freaking idiot to you? Just because I smile a lot, you think you can play me. You just want to use my crew as cannon fodder. Even if we step up, we would get shredded in minutes. You are throwing our lives away just to buy your precious lord a head start, and say by some miracle, we actually hold the line. Then what? You think those psychos are just going to let us walk away? Unfazed, the commander points out the cold, hard truth. They are mercenaries, not sworn knights. The enemy is fully aware of this. The second I go down, your little army is going to scatter like rats, he adds. Jake flashes a dangerously wide grin. Bingo. That is exactly how our industry works. But you are not stupid, right, to those bloodthirsty monsters. My crew isn't just neutral muscle. We are sworn enemies. They will slaughter without a second thought. And it is all because of how dirty we play. The scene flashes back to a blood-drenched skirmish, where the enemy forces stumble upon their massacred comrades, spotting just one lone survivor. The enemy commander casually waves a hand, ordering a heavily armored knight to go check for signs of life. But the second the knight leans in, Jake, who was totally faking his injuries, viciously jams his blade straight into the gap of the guy's neck armor. Panic erupts as the knights realize it is an ambush. These were not fallen allies. They were the cutthroat hounds of the Fang Squad. Right on cue, every single dead mercenary lying in the mud springs up like a zombie and brutally swarms the shocked knights. Watching his men get butchered, the enemy commander screams, "You scum are wearing the armor of our dead brothers. Have you absolutely no honor?" Before the words even settle, Jake violently chops him down, spitting back, "Honor? Never heard of it." Snapping back to reality, Jake coldly reminds his current boss that he has already chopped off the heads of several enemy top brass. "You need to get this through your thick skull. Playing dirty is the only reason my guys are still breathing today. And right now, those maniacs outside are way more obsessed with ripping us limb from limb than chasing down your precious lord." Staring at the noble's blank face, Jake presses harder. "Did you seriously think we could just naturally draw all their aggro without getting wiped?" Unblinking, the commander coldly shuts him down. "You just need to shut up and do the job." If he pushed it, stepping up and claiming his life, along with the squad's leadership, would be his only play left. It was the only move on the board. The second his fingers brushed he spat that he was completely brain dead for believing this guy was even a fraction better than the rest of those snobby Turns out, he's literally the most toxic one in the bunch. The commander-in-chief offered a heavy apology, claiming he meant it from the bottom of his heart. He scoffed. "What's a sorry gonna fix? Honestly, it's way better like this." Tossing a useless head like his to the bloodthirsty hounds waiting downstairs. Yeah, zero guilt tripping over that. He demanded to know if this dude was seriously planning to bribe the traitors with his head, just to beg for his own pathetic life. Our boy locked it in. As much as he'd love to just ditch him and dip, he knew he'd already set traps to lock them down. Since things had hit rock bottom as their commander, he had to see his grim duty through to the bitter end. The rebels would totally settle for 2 commander heads on a silver platter. The trade-off, his squad walks away breathing. The commander-in-chief stared, mind blown. 2 commanders. Was he dead-ass about to sacrifice his own life to shield his crew? The MC snapped back that he dragged these guys into hell, on a promise to prove that even starting from the absolute gutter, they could still make their wildest dreams reality. They banked everything on him riding this out until the wheels fell off. As the guy calling the shots, stepping up and tanking the consequences, was his only option. The commander-in-chief was shook, seeing him in a totally new light. Barking out a hysterical laugh, he admitted that was the ultimate flex of a real leader. Such a tragic waste. If that garbage Crawford hadn't been in the picture, if he had been his master, the whole script would have flipped. The second those words dropped, our MC launched himself forward, flashing and shutting his eyes as his entire life flashed by. He whipped his blade in a lethal arc and whispered, "Don't forgive me." As his vision spun, and he watched his own headless body slump over, he figured he had seen this coming, but damn, he never realized the power gap was that massive. So this was game over. He'd ordered his crew to run like hell and never look back if he missed their deadline. Knowing they were safe, he could finally flatline in peace. Still, one brutal what if kept haunting him. If he had been handed the same golden ticket as that privileged jerk, how far could he have actually gone? He plunged into absolute darkness. But plot twist, this wasn't the credits rolling. A muffled, distant voice started echoing, begging him to snap out of it. Peeling his heavy eyelids open, his vision blurred on some random kid hovering over him. "Who the hell are you?" he groaned. Out of nowhere, this kid smacked him right across the face, bawling his eyes out and screaming for him to wake up. Outraged, the MC barked, "What is your problem?" Totally disoriented, he rubbed his stinging cheek. What just went down? Did he seriously just get slapped? Which absolute clown had a death wish? Wiping away buckets of tears, the kid sobbed out, "Young Master Lucian." He kept pleading with him to stay conscious. Hearing that high-class title totally threw him off. Squinting, he finally took in his surroundings. Red flags instantly started popping up everywhere. What the heck happened to his hands? Where did all his hardcore calluses and battle scars vanish to? His skin wasn't just flawlessly smooth. It was the soft, fragile skin of a spoiled aristocrat. And seriously, who was this crybaby next to him? The kid had just slapped a lethal warrior across the face, yet he was the one sobbing. Predictably, the boy just started wailing even louder. He screamed that this was a total miracle, admitting he fully thought his master had his heart basically flatlined. If the worst had actually gone down, he as the personal servant would have been totally doomed. Not to mention it would have been a massive catastrophe for the entire estate. The M's young master, personal valet. He hadn't uttered those bougie words once in his entire miserable life. The wildest part, he had a crystal clear memory of dying. He had his freaking head sliced clean off. Nobody just casually walks off a decapitation. So how in the world was his pulse still thumping? Scanning the lavish room and doing the math in his head, only one insane explanation made sense. Right now, he was hijacked into a total stranger's body. Dragging himself over to a mirror, a sly smirk spread across his lips as he checked out his absolutely god-tier reflection. One look, and it was painfully obvious this high-maintenance aesthetic screamed elite noble from an obscenely loaded bloodline. Shooting a side eye at his sniffling servant, his soldier instincts kicked in. Step 1. Speedrun some intel gathering. Pretty sure this guy's name was Hans. Turning to face him, he locked eyes and said, "I need to ask you something." Hans instantly stiffened up in panic, stuttering out that he'd answer literally anything. The MC didn't miss a beat. "What year is it?" The kid looked totally weirded out, but blamed it on a drug trip from the meds. He squeaked out that it was currently the year 846. The MC froze. If he went by the imperial calendar, that was a solid 15 years before his execution. Mind blown. He had literally respawned straight into the past. How or why this cosmic glitch happened was a total mystery, but freaking out wasn't an option. He needed to lock in and focus on the immediate crisis. Massaging his pounding temples, he let out a heavy sigh. "One last question," he muttered. "Do you just have a death wish?" The poor servant violently recoiled, his face pale with sheer terror, stammering out a desperate, What do you mean, sir?" Our guy glared down at him. "A pathetic peasant like you actually had the guts to put your filthy hands on your master while I was blacked out. And if not, then start talking. Tell me exactly who I am." Hans started visibly sweating bullets. He dropped into a deep bow, frantically begging for forgiveness, babbling that he was just so overwhelmed with relief that he completely the third young master of the legendary Valdec bloodline. Our MC's eyes widened in pure shock. Wait, that Valdec? The Valdec dynasty wasn't just some rich aristocratic household. They were the literal backbone of the empire, fiercely guarding. Their influence practically mirrored the royal family itself. We are talking absolute god-tier status. And he knew their dark secrets inside out. Why? Because 15 years ago, he was just a lowly grunt guarding their massive gates. Talk about a wild plot twist. He literally bit the dust only to respawn at his old workplace, but this time inside the body of the boss's third son. A dark, cynical chuckle escaped his lips. The irony was absolutely insane. In his past life, being born at the absolute bottom meant swallowing endless soul-crushing abuse. He had tasted dirt and humiliation every single day, but now the universe just handed him a golden ticket. He always fantasized about shattering the glass ceiling if he just had the right buffs and privileges. Well, fate was finally calling his bluff. If he was playing on easy mode now, he swore to climb to the absolute peak and flex on everyone who ever doubted him. Fully embracing this insane reality upgrade, Lucian threw on some high-end threads and stepped out to explore. Scanning his surroundings with eagle eyes, the Valdec territory was dripping in unimaginable wealth. As a former gun for hire, he had practically seen the entire globe, but nothing came close to this blinding opulence. Still, he needed to adapt to this royal vibe and fast. But the vibe was super weird. The moment he stepped out, maids and guards started whispering, acting like they just saw a ghost. Catching the side eyes, he glanced at Hans. Or is everyone acting completely unhinged? Hans nervously coughed. Well, sir, it makes sense. You basically ghosted everyone, locking yourself in your bedroom for a solid year and 2 months. No visitors allowed. Lucian let out a dry laugh, his mind spinning. What kind of introverted madness was that? What could a pampered, silver-spoon kid possibly be running from to become a total hermit? You could blame it on typical rich kid tantrums, but there was a massive red flag. Nobody survives pulling a stunt like that in this household, because this territory is ruled with an iron fist by an absolute monster, the ultimate shield of the empire. A terrifying powerhouse, built on hardcore discipline and zero mercy. Archduke Sigmund. There is zero chance that ruthless warlord would just quietly watch his own bloodline rot in a dark corner, which left 2 brutal options. Either Lucian was such a spectacular failure that his dad was basically waiting to cut him out of the will, or the Archduke had some top-secret motive for turning a blind eye. Until he cracked the code, avoiding his new dad was mission critical. Suddenly, an elegant figure rushed up. "Ah, so the rumors of your miraculous comeback are actually true. Laying eyes on you after a whole year is an absolute blessing, young master. Are you experiencing any pain? Is your mobility all right?" Lucian's brain instantly flashed a warning sign. This wasn't just some random NPC. This was Edwin, the legendary head butler, back in the day. He was literally dragged here as a political hostage from a rival clan. But the dude was so fiercely competent that the family actually handed him the keys to the entire freaking estate. He was Archduke Sigmund's ultimate shadow. Damn it, this was literally the final boss of the household. He just ran into the absolute worst person possible. A guy this sharp could instantly sniff out Lucian's gritty street rat. His only saving grace: Edwin hadn't interacted with the real Lucian in over a year. In that case, he had to put on an Oscar-worthy performance. Channeling the aura of the snobbiest military commander he ever met, he flashed a perfectly crafted, icy smile. "I deeply appreciate. Thanks to your prayers, I'm feeling incredibly sharp. Honestly, I've been rotting in that room for way too long, totally neglecting my royal status. So I figured it was time to step out and check the pulse of the estate. Bumping into you is perfect timing. I trust our empire is thriving." Edwin's eyes narrowed slightly, definitely caught off guard by the sudden charisma, but he smoothly masked it with a polite bow. "House Valdec is practically untouchable right now, young master, and seeing you radiate such fierce energy brings me immense joy." Lucian let out an arrogant chuckle. "Come on, with a mastermind like you running the show, what could—" Nailed it, Lucian thought. The old man doesn't suspect a damn thing. He just needed to keep coasting on this arrogant vibe. "Well, it sounds like I was stressing over absolutely nothing. I'll leave you to your duties, honestly. This fresh air is already draining my energy." He turned to walk away, but Edwin's voice suddenly dropped, cutting like ice. "I must ask you to hold that thought, young master." The air in the room went dead cold. Panic spiked in my chest as the butler dropped a massive bombshell. Archduke Sigmund demanded to see me, right this second. I dragged my feet to his study, finding the old man glaring daggers at me. Sigmund didn't even blink before firing off a single chilling question. "Why are you still breathing?" My brain short-circuited. I choked out a desperate, "Wait, what does that even mean?" Sigmund growled that he was ready to let things slide. He could stomach the fact that I had totally bailed on my noble duties and acted like a spoiled brat, using his mother's funeral as a shield. But this time I had crossed a massive red line. In his eyes, rotting in that bedroom for over a year wasn't just some edgy protest. I was literally throwing my life away and had actually tried to rage quit existence. I was completely lost, but flashing back to waking up in this crazy mansion, it suddenly clicked why Hans had been bawling his eyes out. Sweating bullets, I stammered out that there had to be some huge mix-up. But the Archduke cut me off, slamming his foot down. This was my one and only lifeline. Wasn't this exactly what I craved? Creating this massive circus, even downing a handful of sleeping pills, all just to force him to listen. My jaw hit the floor. I grinded my teeth, my mind racing as a terrifying puzzle piece snapped into place. This was exactly why I had zero memories of Lucian, the Archduke's third son. Because 15 years ago, back in my past life as a royal guard, this kid died right around the exact same time. Archduke Sigmund Valdec had 4 boys born to 4 different women. During my 10-year grind serving House Valdec, I had bumped into the young masters and their moms plenty of times. Yet my brain drew an absolute blank when it came to Lucien, or his mother. Turns out she was taken out by a tragic illness right after I joined the guard. And Lucian himself, for some messed up reason, he met a similarly dark end. Back then, I just brushed it off and didn't give it a second thought. But the truth was way more toxic. Losing his mom, combined with walking on eggshells in this ruthless family, totally crushed the poor kid. Out of pure desperation, he swallowed a lethal cocktail of pills, just begging for a shred of his father's attention. But after rotting in isolation for over 12 months, he completely underestimated how frail he had become. His shattered body caved in under the poison, and he just faded away. At first I thought the Archduke was a total monster for neglecting his own blood, leaving him isolated for an entire year. But now connecting the dots, it kind of makes sense. No matter how legendary of a ruler Sigmund was, deep down he was probably dying of anxiety inside, just like any normal dad would be for his kid. But hey, This wasn't the time to play therapist. I was literally one toe away from the Grim Reaper myself. He was staring me down, making it brutally obvious that my time was up. A straight-up do-or-die ultimatum. I could practically hear my shiny new future crashing and burning if I let even a single wrong syllable slip past my lips. Best case scenario, I get banished to some moldy monastery in the middle of nowhere to pray my sins away permanently, ghosted by society. Or worse, he ships me off to the frozen hellscape of the north, where I would freeze to death for the rest of eternity, battling mutant monsters and scavenging like a stray dog. Hell no, I paid way too high a price for a second chance to let it glitch out. Now, I absolutely refuse to let my epic comeback get trashed by some toxic family baggage I had zero. Squaring my shoulders, I told the old man that since he wanted the unfiltered truth, I was laying all my cards on the table. First off, for dragging the proud Valdek name through the mud with my absolute reckless behavior, and for giving him heart palpitations. I was genuinely begging for forgiveness. I took full accountability for this massive disaster. No cheap excuses. Whatever brutal punishment he wanted to dish out, I would take it on the chin without a single complaint. My father scoffed coldly, snapping that sweet talk couldn't magically rewrite history, but I cut right through his lecture. Shouldn't we just take the win here? The Archduke froze, completely blindsided, his eyebrows knit in total confusion. I somehow dodged the Grim Reaper, and I was entirely done obsessing over my tragic backstory. From this second on, I was locking in on my future. So looking him dead in the eye, I begged him not as my boss, but as my dad, to give me just a shred of fatherly advice moving forward. A screw-up kid finally drops his ego to apologize, and a dad proudly pulls him back from the edge. Isn't that like the ultimate, heaven-ordained bond between a father and his son? Edwin's jaw basically detached from his face. The tension in the room instantly evaporated. Was this bold guy seriously young Master Lucian, the same pathetic kid who used to jump at his own shadow? The Archduke went dead silent, while my heart hammered against my ribs like a bass drum. Sigmund finally cracked a smirk, asking if I really had the guts to talk back and lecture him on parenting. Honestly, he was totally eating it up. He chuckled, muttering that you really do witness some insane miracles if you live long enough. I flashed a confident smile internally, breathing out a massive, shaky sigh of relief. He smirked. Nailed it. He knew playing games was a waste of time. Going straight for the throat was the absolute ultimate play. Archduke Valdek absolutely despised spineless rats. That man only respected feral hounds willing to bare their teeth. Sigmund leaned in, noting that brushing with death must have completely nuked the boy's sense of fear. Since you're so hyped about the future, he challenged, lay out your exact game. Closing his eyes, memories of his brutal clash with the commander-in-chief flashed through his mind. He locked eyes with his dad and declared after that he was going all in on swordplay. The Archduke actually blinked, utterly caught off guard by the sheer audacity. But Lucian added he had to fix his brutally fragile health stats first. Honestly, if I just eat heavy and sleep deep, the rest will buff itself out. Sigmund was still mentally buffering at this insane glow-up. A rare smirk crossed the old man's face. You've got a sharp tongue on you now, he mused. We'll see if you can actually back up that tough talk, or if it's... With a snap of his fingers, he signaled the butler, ordering him to reinstate the kid's perks. Hard cash would fuel this fire way better than some boomer lecture the boy would just tune out anyway. Our MC was completely lost in the sauce. Meanwhile, Edwin executed a flawless bow, assuring the Archduke that the vibe was fully understood, and that he would handle the drop immediately. Lucian racked his brain, trying to decode their secret chat, but the punchline literally rolled right up to his front door. A whole convoy of heavy carts, groaning under the weight of massive gold chests, parked right outside his crib. Staring at the glittering hall, his jaw hit the floor. This had to be a glitch in the Matrix. Talk about literal high-class privilege. That top-secret favor they were whispering about. It was just a downright filthy, ungodly mountain of cash. And the craziest part, this was just his allowance for a single month. With this absurd level of funding, he could completely min-max this pathetic vessel and brew that legendary elixir. Cut to the estate's lush greenhouse, where Sigmund strolled in with Edwin trailing behind. The butler's eyes softened, knowing the late Duchess used to treat this floral sanctuary like her absolute... The Archduke hadn't stepped foot in here for ages. Edwin totally saw this moody detour coming, though. Breaking his long streak of dodging this place, It was 100% triggered by the young master's shocking reboot. Sure, the kid had totally fallen off his radar, but at the end of the day, he carried the blood of the woman Sigmund had fiercely loved. Leaving the boy to crash and burn was never actually on the table. Staring at the blooms, Sigmund scoffed, recalling how pathetic his son. The kid couldn't even hold eye contact, he muttered, always twitching, constantly acting like he was dodging invisible bullets. One raised tone, and he'd instantly cower and whimper like a kicked puppy. His whole vibe was a complete insult to her fearless spirit. For years, Sigmund had written him off as a pretty face with zero backbone. But today, for the very first time, the icy patriarch realized he might have completely misread the boy. Did Edwin catch that too? The way the kid locked eyes and actually stood his ground. A knowing smile tugged at the butler's lips. Edwin agreed, noting the boy radiated a crazy new aura of ice-cold confidence and raw dignity. The young master was always wired to be deeply empathetic and soft-spoken, which totally explains why he always lagged behind the savage pack of his older brothers. But regardless of his past, your fierce blood is still pumping through his veins, sir. Sigmund flashed a dangerous grin. We'll see if he's actually built for this. Smooth talking won't save him from the absolute meat grinder coming his way. Right on cue, Edwin dropped a reality check. A massive red flag had just popped up regarding the kid's newly unfrozen bank accounts. The shadows had been skimming off the top. Intel confirmed a massive embezzlement scheme, and all the messy fingerprints pointed directly to the second son, Jordi Valdec. Worse yet, Jordi had brutally axed Lucian's loyal head maid, planting his own slimy spy in her spot. He was dead set on keeping his little brother on a... Sigmund just sighed. Jordi had skills, sure, but his tunnel vision was painfully tragic. That petty mindset was his fatal glitch. Hating his half-brother's maternal bloodline was one thing, but this level of toxic obsession, straight up pathetic. Edwin smoothly asked if he should authorize a covert cleanup crew. Sigmund instantly shut that down. Stand down. Hands up. Edwin hesitated. Wasn't it totally ruthless to let the wolves circle? The kid was literally just learning how to walk without tripping over his own shadow. The patriarch was ice cold. If the boy had bothered to scan his environment, right now Lucian is just paying the brutal tax for his own past cowardice. Honestly, the timing was totally flawless. Sigmund was genuinely hyped to watch whether his son would fold under pressure or fight back. If he gets crushed by this low-level boss, he's totally useless to me. Having Valdec DNA is a cheat code, sure, but you still have to smash the door open yourself. Fast forward a couple of days. Our MC was completely off the grid, barricaded inside his room, while his loyal tank Hans held down. It had been a solid 72 hours since the massive gold drop. The young master claimed the showdown with the Duke was a massive W, and that his limitless credit card had been fully swiped clean. But Hans knew their toxic family dynamic. The kid must have gone through absolute mental hell, draining every ounce of his willpower just to survive that chat. Hans pictured him silently crying in his room, hauling a crushing emotional trauma. Spoiler alert, Lucian wasn't stressing for a single microsecond. His brain was entirely hijacked by one thought: how to maximize his new loot. Cut to the inside, where our guy was furiously cooking up that game-breaking elixir. Swiping the heavy sweat off his forehead, he checked his ancient recipe book. A sly grin crossed his face. He knew poor Hans was probably having an absolute panic attack right outside that door. Hans held down the fort outside, proving his absolute loyalty. Inside, the Duke's notoriously useless son was suddenly playing mad scientist with alchemy gear. The dude had literally zero experience with beakers and burners. To make things crazier, he was hunting down a ridiculously expensive ultra-rare herb. This weird plant only blooms under the moonlight, and they call it moongrass. And to top off the sheer insanity, this kid just blew his entire life savings to snatch it all up. He ordered Hans to hoard every single blade of moongrass he could find. Sure, he looks totally unhinged right now, but fast forward just 1 year, the price is going to absolutely explode. 10, maybe even 20 times its current value. That stash is going to be worth an absolute fortune. A wicked smirk crossed his face. He quickly composed himself, mentally tipping his hat to the original alchemist's sheer guts. Back in the day, the success rate of this exact remedy was basically zero. Yet those pioneers still gambled everything, sweeping up every last ounce. It was a do-or-die wager, betting the entire future of their guild on one massive risk. And thanks to that insane audacity, nectar, the literal drink of the god, slapping a godly name on a mere potion, actually got them slapped with major blasphemy charges. But the second that Nectar's true power dropped, the whole world instantly changed their tune, dropping the death threats to sing its praises instead. Pop. He uncorked the glass vial, breathing in the rich, earthy scent of the elixir. A deeply satisfied grin spread across his face. Over 1,000 years ago, there was one brutal, unbreakable rule. Your mana level was permanently locked in the second you were born. Hitting that ceiling, literally impossible. Your raw talent was entirely decided by fate, and absolutely nobody could cheat the system. No matter how hard you grinded, smashing through those natural limits was just a pipe dream. At least, that was the old school mindset. The one thing that finally shattered that ironclad law, you guessed it, Nectar. Gulping down just one drop could instantly buff a complete zero into a totally decent swordsman. Granted, his homemade batch wasn't even close to the legendary original. Quality-wise, it was basically a sketchy bargain bin knockoff. But for jump-starting this completely wrecked body, there was literally zero better option. Honestly, he was insanely lucky right now. When massive chaos eventually ripped through the Empire, the Alchemist's Guild was the absolute first place to get torched to the ground. That game-changing Nectar recipe, they flagged it as way too overpowered, wiping it completely from history. So he had to painfully piece together a bootleg version by hoarding every scrap of leftover intel. Fun fact, most test subjects actually violently died from shaking off that morbid thought. He stopped dragging his feet. He threw his head back and downed the glowing liquid, knowing the only thing that mattered was surviving the next 10 seconds. When you forcefully convert the raw energy of nature into personal power, you get mana. But the actual quality and sheer firepower you squeeze out, that entirely depends on how smoothly your internal circuit. It's the constant rhythmic cycle of pumping mana through your veins and pulling it back to your core. Right now, he was weaponizing the Nectar to violently blast open this body's completely clogged energy channels. But as those pathways ripped open, something crazy. Zero resistance. None of that brutal, agonizing pain that normally hits when forcing mana into your system. Instead, the energy is surging through him, flawlessly, like water rushing straight back into the ocean. Literally every human, even a newborn baby, has toxic impurities blocking their core. Was this weakling Lucian actually a hidden once-in-a-generation prodigy? The sun dipped below the horizon. Outside, Hans was practically pacing holes into the floorboards, stressing over his young master. Until click. Did I miss any drama while I was in there? He asked, casually stepping out. The loyal servant practically tackled him, eyes completely bloodshot with tears. Young master, do you have any idea how long you've been locked in there? I kept screaming your name, but it was dead silent. And you gave me strict orders to never come in, so I was just stuck out here panicking. I was terrified you were dead in there. Hans rambled, heart pounding. But the moment he locked onto the boy's unbothered smirk and dangerously sharp gaze, the words completely died. Totally baffled, Hans whispered his name, circling him, like he was looking at a ghost. I mean, I know it's you, but why does it feel like I'm looking at a total stranger? Lucian flashed a knowing grin, mentally dubbing the guy a sharp-eyed bastard. Hans practically raised the old Lucian. At first, his radar was going off. Honestly, this fragile shell of a body still needs massive amounts of food and recovery time to actually buff up. So physically, he still looks pretty pathetic. But what's brewing beneath the surface is the real game changer. His internal core is evolving at an absolutely terrifying speed. And it's 100% thanks to Lucian's dormant, freakish genetics. This kid's hidden potential literally rivals the god-tier heroes who rewrote history. If he plays his cards flawlessly, give him exactly 1 year, and he'll regain every single ounce of his former lethal. He patted Hans smoothly, claiming that this incredible glow-up was all thanks to him. Hans just blinked, totally clueless about what the hell was going on. Gripping the servant's shoulders tight, he locked eyes with him. Remember this, Hans. Screw-ups get severely punished, but real loyalty, that gets rewarded big time. Now listen to me very carefully, he warned, his voice dropping low. A dark, almost villainous chuckle slipped. Liquidate every single asset you own right now. Dump everything you have into buying up Moongrass. He flashed a devilish smile. Do that and I swear, you are going to live like an... Together, they were going to climb to the absolute peak. Hans gave him this super weird look, and our boy just smirked, totally convinced his buddy was just low-key jealous. Back in his past life, finding a noble like that was basically impossible. Fast forward 7 days, and the duo hits the woods. Lucian just grinned, soaking up the pure, unmatched vibes. Was life seriously this easy? A massive 5-star feast dropped like clockwork every single night. His bedroom was insanely spotless, and he barely had to lift a single finger. The maids even prepped his bed for him, a massive flex, considering he used to starve on the daily. With all his needs covered, he could go all in on his physical recovery, while also digging into the mystery that was eating away at his brain. He whipped out a crumpled sketch from his pocket. It was a rough portrait of his past self, back when he was still a gritty mercenary, going by the name Jake. He'd already grilled the captain about it, only to hear that nobody fitting that description had ever signed up for the guard. Some random dude was now covering his old shifts, but honestly, that was probably for the best. Crossing paths with his old body would just spawn a massive migraine. Plus, he definitely wasn't mentally prepped to face his former self yet. He'd probably just die of pure cringe. Hans nervously broke the silence, stammering out a question. Was he seriously heading back there? The servant reminded him that he swore he'd never step foot on those training grounds again. Our boy blinked in total confusion, asking if those words actually left his mouth. Hans snapped back, visibly stressed, shouting that he absolutely did. He had literally sworn on his life that after that brutal clash with the second young master, he would never, ever go back. Reading the pure panic radiating off his servant, our guy started piecing together the dark history of this place. Sword fighting was a hard requirement for any kid born into the Grand Duke's bloodline, which handed the second young master the absolute perfect loophole. Hiding behind the excuse of giving him sparring lessons, that psycho basically beat a primal paralyzing fear of violence into young Lucian's brain, guaranteeing he'd never even look at the training grounds again. Brushing it off, he calmly told his panicking servant that he totally grasped the situation, but they had zero reason to sweat it. All that trauma was ancient history now. Hans was still visibly shaking, so our boy shot him a confident smirk and told him to just trust the process. Meanwhile, across the yard, a beefy knight named Hendrik just got tipped off that the traumatized young master had actually strolled onto the turf on his own 2 feet. The dude was completely floored. His grunt reported that the kid was currently scoping out the arena with his lackey, stroking his chin and twisting his mustache. Hendrik maliciously wondered why this little puppy crawled back. There was no way he just magically forgot the brutal beatdown from that day. Figuring he could definitely spin this to score some brownie points, he immediately ordered his men to alert the second young master. He was going to roll out the red carpet and give this kid a highly painful welcome the second he showed up. Oblivious to the trap, Lucian scanned the sprawling armory, his eyes widening in pure awe. He had definitely crossed his fingers for a decent setup, but this place completely shattered his expectations. Not only were the racks stacked with top-tier steel that wouldn't shatter after 2 clanks, but the sheer amount of space for crazy combat maneuvers was insane. And to think this massive weapon stash belonged to just one dude. If he could grind his levels in a spot like this, maybe he actually could have kept more of his old squad breathing. A heavy wave of survivor's guilt hit him hard, but it instantly vanished when a booming, arrogant voice echoed from behind. Hendrik swaggered up, laughing about how his eyes weren't playing tricks. It really was the pathetic third young master. What a massive shocker. He claimed he thought the report was fake news. With a nasty sneer, he brought up the memory from exactly 1 year ago, back when he was sparring with Lord Geordie. He mocked how the kid had sprinted away sobbing, too terrified to even glance back over his shoulder. A pathetic little lamb fleeing from a bloodthirsty wolf. He guessed that crippling PTSD was exactly why the kid was still shaking in his boots, needing to drag a weak little servant into the sacred stomping grounds of real men. Dropping the fake polite act, he noted it had been way too long. He practically bragged about how back then he had personally corrected the kid's combat stance right alongside the second young master, assuming the trauma hadn't erased his memory, of course. Hendrik vividly recalled the boy hyperventilating and shivering with pure terror. To the twisted knight, it was pure entertainment. He even called it the good old days. Hearing this garbage, our boy just let out a dark chuckle, absolutely stunned by the audacity of this clown. Now, traditionally, a knight is supposed to be the ultimate symbol of honor and die-hard loyalty. Usually born into wealth, these guys endure hellish combat conditioning from childhood, getting strict etiquette drilled into their skulls. And only after bathing in enough blood on the battlefield do they actually earn that shiny title. But honestly, At the end of the day, they're basically just glorified guard dogs choking on expensive, diamond-studded collars. Sure, the Lord might drown them in cash and shiny medals, but their literal job description is to bow down to anyone with royal blood in their veins. Yet this oversized grunt had the nerve to run his mouth like this. Obviously, Lucian's rock-bottom status in the family was the green light for this disrespect. But let's be real, he was nothing but Geordie's attack dog barking out of turn, only because he knew his master held the leash. If our guy had it his way, he'd drag this knight through an absolute meat grinder of a training camp. His brain was already looping violent fantasies of burying throwing knives into the guy's chest. But doing that would instantly put him on. Whether he liked it or not, these arrogant tin cans were the family's main firepower. Slicing one up without proper protocol. Yeah, that was pushing it now would just spark useless drama between the lord and his vassals. It was way too early for that kind of heat. The timing was completely off. He brushed it off, telling him that dodging the training grounds over some ancient drama was completely brain-dead. He was locking in. From now on, this place would be his second home. Like he said, an entire year had already slipped through their fingers. Wasn't it time to grind and get it back? The knight just cracked up, mocking him to his face. Way too late for that, he scoffed. And you seriously think you can pick up a blade now? Too late, he shot back. I am barely 16. The knight smirked, looking at him like a clueless kid. Since you are completely out of the loop, let me spell it out for you. Once you cross 15, you are washed. Done. Our sword arts aren't just swings, they are legendary techniques, passed down through generations, unlocking absolute clarity for anyone who masters the flow. It is the peak of physical conditioning, forged from ancient wisdom. But here is the catch, kid. It only works under one condition. Your mana core has to be wide open. And at 16, that door is slammed shut. Without magic, those lethal techniques are just a fancy workout. Swinging a sword without that spark, just an empty, hollow dance. He gave him a condescending pat on the shoulder, flashing a twisted, nasty grin as he whispered, "Honestly, it fits you perfectly. You are on track to become the absolute champion of losers in the entire empire. Do yourself a favor, save some time and find a real hobby. And hey, if you fail at everything else, you can always go touch grass and be a gardener. Everyone has their place in the dirt." The boy stayed dead silent, making Hendrik grin with pure satisfaction. The knight gloated internally. Look at him totally muted. The reality, that whole magic dies at 16 speech, was complete garbage. A total cap that would fall apart the second anyone checked. But who cared? He could just play dumb later. The psychological damage was already dealt. He saw him as a brainless coward, too utterly crushed by his own ignorance to even talk back. Just a pathetic punching bag for the staff to mock. A weakling, paralyzed by fear. Exactly the same pathetic joke he was a year ago. But suddenly Lucian leaned into the persona of the original body's timid owner and mumbled, feigning confusion. Wait, that doesn't match what I read. I thought the mana core permanently seals at 35, not at 16. So, theoretically, absolutely nothing is stopping me from picking up a sword right now, right? The knight's stomach instantly dropped. He masked his panic with a sneer. "Oh, are you really that sure, kid?" The boy shook his head. "Me? No. But does my older brother Geordie agree with you?" Hendrik stood his ground. Obviously, at his basic common sense, he slicked back his hair, dripping with arrogance, and thought to himself, checkmate. The second the older brother's name dropped, this loser wouldn't dare squeak out another word. "I knew it," Lucian whispered, looking horrified. My brother really said the exact same thing. Suddenly he lunged and grabbed Hans by the head. "Hans, it is a disaster. A literal curse is eating the Valdek family alive. You feel it too, right?" The servant froze, completely freaked out by this chaotic energy. Then, clutching his own face, Lucian whipped around to scream at the knight. "Why are you dragging me into this mess? You guys are butchering basic facts that even a stray dog on the street knows. Grown men entirely delusional about how magic works. Do you have any idea how many prodigies this fake news has ruined?" He looked like he was seconds away from completely breaking down in tears. My own flesh and blood, totally brain dead. Hendrik just stood there, brain completely lagging, trying to process this manic episode. The boy pounded his fist against his chest. "Don't try to stop me, because if what you just claimed is actually true, then our family is an absolute laughingstock, a walking tragedy." A deadly smirk flashed across his face. "But hey, you wouldn't lie to your lord's son, right?" The knight started sweating bullets. What are you implying? That I am playing you? Lucian waved his hands frantically. Oh, no. Forget I said anything. I was just yapping, spouting pure nonsense. I mean, I was just completely stunned. A noble knight of House Valdec would never stoop to being a cheap liar, right? Hendrik swallowed hard. Of course not. Closing the distance between them, Lucian's voice dropped. Exactly what I thought. Which means, we absolutely cannot sweep this under the rug, either. He smirked inwardly. Time to teach you what happens when you run your mouth without a brain. He stared dead into the knight's eyes. You clearly do not grasp the massive red flag here. If this was just you trying to roast me, whatever. I would have let it go in one ear and out the other. Then he cranked his volume to max, throwing his arms wide open like a theater actor. I know for a fact that not only the knights, but every single person in this estate looks at me like trash. And yeah, my bad for slacking off and wasting time. I own that. But that is totally beside the point right now. If a sworn knight and my older brother, the literal pillars of this duchy, are gatekeeping talented fighters by spreading wild misinformation, I cannot just look the other way. This level of incompetence cripples the military might of the Valdec Knights. It puts the lives of our citizens at massive risk, destroying the very foundation of our survival. It is an unforgivable threat. His speech was so insanely passionate that Hans actually started tearing up. And as someone with Valdec blood running through my veins, I am absolutely disgusted, Lucian declared. Deep down, he gave himself a standing ovation, proud of how perfectly he had devoured the scene. Lucian leaned in, asking Hendrik if the sheer weight of his mess was finally sinking in. He aggressively jabbed a finger dead center into the knight's chest, dropping a chilling warning, brace for the fallout. He was dragging this straight to their father, demanding an absolute crackdown on the ranks. Hendrik started sweating bullets, totally spiraling. Wait, he thought. This kid, the same kid who used to shake like a leaf just hearing the Duke's name, is actually stepping up. Why is he flexing so hard right now? Has this little punk always been hiding this energy? He went from a pathetic lamb straight to a feral wolf. Cue Geordie. He swaggered into the training grounds, demanding to know what the massive uproar was about. Catching his voice, Hendrik whipped around, completely panicking. A wicked smirk flashed across Lucian's face. Oh, so the golden child finally decided to grace them with his presence. Impeccable timing. Locking eyes with the MC, Geordie immediately curled his lip in pure disgust. Meanwhile, Hendrik scrambled over like a lost puppy, desperately promising to explain the whole mess. The knight started frantically spilling the details, but Geordie sharply threw up a hand, cutting him off dead in his tracks. Save the excuses. Stepping directly into Hendrik's personal space, he hissed that he'd literally watched the entire embarrassing spectacle unfold, falling for the bait of a kid who was practically young enough to be his son. Absolutely pathetic. Geordie coldly ordered the knight to wipe that pathetic look off his face unless, of course, he wanted to drag the family's reputation even deeper into the dirt. He shot a freezing glare at Lucian. Hans, meanwhile, was basically cowering behind the MC's back, trembling as he whispered, "What do we do? He looks insanely triggered." Lucian just mentally chuckled. That totally unhinged look on Geordie's face. Absolute perfection. Enter Geordie Valdec, the notoriously toxic second son. Ever since he totally gave up on achieving anything real, his absolute favorite hobby is violently taking his frustrations out on the late-night staff. Calling him a true aristocrat is a massive joke. The guy is nothing but an inflated ego wrapped in a totally hysterical personality. But the worst part, he holds a grudge like no other. The absolute second he decides someone has outlived their usefulness, he completely cancels them, tossing the poor victim straight to the wolves. But honestly, this toxic behavior was playing right into Lucian's master plan. Slapping on a fake bright smile, Lucian casually greeted his brother, noting that he was looking well. Geordie just scoffed. What a completely brainless idiot. Whatever garbage Lucian had just been feeding Sir Hendrik, Geordie had watched the entire show. He actually had the sheer audacity to drag the Valdec name through the mud. The MC blinked in completely feigned innocence. Ruined our honor. Wait, bro, when did I do that? Care to drop some details? Geordie sneered. Sir Hendrik had obviously already backed down, so if there was some petty misunderstanding, Lucian weaponizing their family name just to stir up toxic drama was a massive red flag. There was absolutely no dodging this one. But shockingly, Geordie played the bigger person. He wasn't going to completely verbally destroy him, because he knew just how much blood, sweat, and tears Sir Hendrik had sacrificed for the Valdez, and the heavy price tag attached to his lifelong loyalty. Completely unlike Lucian, who literally couldn't even survive a basic sword drill. The kid always dipped at the first sign of danger. Did he seriously think he had any right to point fingers? For starters, he needed to heavily check his ego and start respecting the knights. Without them carrying the team, the Valdec bloodline would literally be ancient history. Geordie dramatically pivoted to the knights, smoothly begging their pardon for the completely unhinged chaos his brother just caused. Chalking it up to the reckless tantrum of an immature kid, he urged them to just let it slide. From this moment on, he would personally keep a suffocatingly tight leash on his problematic little brother. Catching that incredibly smug, toxic grin, Lucian's eyes darkened. "Oh, so that's the card we're playing," he thought. Maybe the guy actually had a couple of brain cells rubbing together after all. Plot twist. Geordie was literally the one trash-talking the knights just a second ago, but he smoothly gaslit everyone, completely flipping the script to make Lucian look like the villain, all while casting himself as the heroic defender of justice. Okay, round one to Geordie. Out loud, Lucian slow-clapped his brother's incredibly predictable act. "Look, it was just a tiny microscopic miscommunication between me and Sir Hendrik," Lucian countered smoothly. "Honestly, bro, you totally should have completely wrecked me for stepping out of line. But instead you dropped some major life lessons on me. And to think my dumb self literally just called my own flesh and blood totally brainless." Hans was on the verge of passing out, desperately hissing at him to shut up. But Lucian completely ignored him, dramatically pressing his hand to his chest, acting deeply devastated by his own toxic words. "Once again, your lowly little brother has been absolutely blinded by your unmatched glowing generosity." The surrounding knights were totally buffering, completely lost on what was actually happening. Suddenly, the MC wildly snapped his fingers at his servant. "Hans, you need to document my brother's absolute raw wisdom right now. Forget paper. Grab the highest quality silk." This was exactly the chaotic energy Lucian needed, to permanently, completely nuke his old reputation as a pathetic loser, and brand this new savage version of himself right into everyone's brains. The weak, totally irrelevant third son, officially dead. Flipping his tone instantly, he coldly told Geordie he was bouncing, lowering his voice to mutter that absolutely nothing productive was going to happen by them just awkwardly standing around. Literally vibrating with sheer rage, snapped that this kid had zero respect for authority. "You seriously think you can just walk away?" Lucian casually glanced back. "Did you casually forget that our father has basically been micromanaging my every move lately? I've literally got absolutely nothing to lose here. But you've got everything on the line." Geordie instantly froze dead silent. Smirking, Lucian announced he'd take that totally awkward silence, grabbed his paralyzed servant, and threw a mock salute to his brother. The second they turned around, he hissed at Hans to step on it. They needed to vanish right now. Cut to Hendrik. He nervously shuffles up to Geordie, practically sweating bullets. "Wait, are we seriously just letting him walk away like that?" he stammers. Geordie stays dead silent, his eyes burning holes into the back of Lucian's head. Meanwhile, far away from the arena, Hans keeps checking over his shoulder like a paranoid wreck. "Young master, are we actually going to survive this stunt?" he squeaks. Hans knows Geordie is an absolute hothead. There is zero chance that Psycho is letting this slide. Even if they technically won today, Hans is terrified that Meathead Knight is going to ambush him in some dark alleyway. He would literally just vanish without a trace. The poor guy literally breaks down sobbing. Lucian tells him to take a deep breath. He gets it honestly. Only someone who has survived a completely toxic workplace truly, when an absolutely useless boss tanks the whole operation, then wipes his hands clean and leaves you holding the bag. Yeah, Lucian knows exactly how garbage that feels. Flashing a warm, reassuring smile, he tells the kid to drop the anxiety. "That is not happening on my watch," he promises. "No knight actually has the guts to try anything funny, and even if they did, I am not just going to stand by and watch." Reaching out, he firmly pulls the crying boy to his feet. "Look, you caught all this heat because of me," Lucian admits. "Whenever a boss acts like a total clown, it is always the guy at the bottom paying the ultimate price. And as his right-hand guy, Hans has definitely tanked the most brutal hits out of everyone." Hearing this, Hans's eyes well up again, completely moved by the Lucian looks him dead in the eye and swears an absolute oath. From now on, no one in his crew is ever getting clowned on or terrorized just because he was slacking off. Hans grips his hand tight, fully locking in his loyalty. Fast forward a bit. Lucian is practically stomping down the mansion hallways, radiating pure anger. Ever since that massive showdown at the arena, the puzzle pieces have finally... It makes perfect sense why things have been so suspiciously quiet. The Geordie he knows is way too petty to just take a massive... But the gig is completely up. That snake was scheming the most foul, underhanded revenge plot behind the... Hidden behind his back, Lucian crushes the monthly financial statement in his fist, his knuckles turning totally white from sheer rage. Does that absolute idiot even realize how long I have been hyping up this exact payday? He snaps. Hans violently nods along, totally on the same. There's absolutely zero chance they are letting Geordie slide on this scam. Lucian glances over, smirking. You locked in, point. Hans throws a hyped-up punch at the empty air, totally ready for war. How dare those absolute rats touch my cash? Lucian roars. Yeah, and they straight up robbed my paycheck too, Hans chimes in, equally. So here is the tea. It all kicked off when Lucian got handed the treasury report earlier today. It was supposed to be payday, the glorious moment. He was so hyped to finally drop some bags on the gear he desperately needed. That was the dream anyway. But the second he scanned those numbers, his jaw lit, his allowance brutally slashed by 75%, and poor Hans's hard-earned salary chopped down by 30%. It instantly clicked. That toxic second brother was draining his funds like a literal parasite, using the newly assigned head maid as his personal money launderer. Stealing noble funds is not just a slap on the wrist. It is a massive felony that can literally get your head chopped off. Yet Geordie still had the sheer audacity to pull off this insane heist. How? Because the old Lucian had completely checked out letting Geordie prey on his depression right after his mom. Back then, Lucian just dumped all his financial duties onto someone else. The original head maid, Dana. She was a ride or die who had loyally managed his life for years, totally unlike this random new snake. Kicking the door open, he confronts the new girl. She just flashes a fake, "Oh my, the elusive young master. This is actually my first time seeing you in the flesh," she purrs. "A total pleasure. I am Jenny." She proudly flexes her brand new title as the head maid, replacing Madame Dana. She claims she had been dying to say hi the second she got the promotion. But well, you were busy rotting away in your bedroom, she mocks subtly. So are you finally done playing the shut-in? Hans practically pops a blood vessel at the sheer disrespect. Hey, watch your filthy mouth when you address the young master, he barks. But Lucian holds up a hand, telling him to chill out. The snake wasn't completely wrong, and honestly, he wasn't here to throw hands over some petty sarcasm. They had way bigger fish to fry today. Glaring down at the smug maid, he decides to just cut the absolute garbage and skip to the chase. You are the one cooking the books, right? He demands, slamming the financial statement on the table. She lets out a snarky little giggle. Oh, so that is why I was summoned. Guilty as charged. I drafted the budget, she admits without flinching. I was informed you literally handed over all the financial keys to the last maid, so I am just blindly following company protocol. She tilts her head, smirking. Though I gotta admit, it is pretty wild getting cross-examined by you, of all people. Especially since I am just out here hustling to do my job. A job you were supposed to be doing from day one. Lucian totally saw this massive gaslighting attempt coming from a mile away. Yeah, the old Lucian dropped the ball massively. Fair point, he replies smoothly. Maybe your hands were completely tied on that one. But even giving you the absolute benefit of the doubt, there is one massive red flag here I cannot just ignore. He aggressively taps the paper. I did the math. Turns out the massive bag my father dropped on me mysteriously vanished into massive pay bumps for the staff. And honestly, since they had to deal with my but care to explain why my boy Hans over here did not get a single dime and actually got his paycheck brutally nerfed. Like, could she make the targeted bullying any more obvious? She just lets out another fake giggle, totally playing dumb. Oops, honestly, I completely missed that. My bad, honestly. But running this entire chaotic mansion is practically a 24/7 grind. You literally cannot expect me to micromanage every single penny. Everyone here knows I am totally burnt out. She shoots a pointed, threatening glare at the other maids. Right, ladies? Their nervous flinches and forced plastic smiles basically screamed guilty. Lucian instantly knew his time here was totally up. He let out a heavy sigh, spinning on his heel as he ordered his servant to pack it up. Sure, this body technically belonged to him, but his own limbs felt like they were on autopilot. Right before stepping out, he locked eyes with the head maid, dropping one final icy question. He warned her to choose her words wisely. "Do you even know who your actual master is?" She just flashed a cocky smirk, tossing back that he should probably ask young Master Geordie about that. Lucien clicked his tongue, fully realizing that, to make it out alive, he had to completely carve out this toxic, and that was exactly the brutal reality he was facing right now. Later that night, they rolled up to a shady tavern. Hans, looking totally lost, sputtered, "Wait, didn't you say we were going fishing to chill out? Why the heck are we at a dive bar?" Lucien just eyed the brutal bare-knuckle brawl popping off in the pit, and the sweaty crowd screaming over their bets. Flashing a wicked grin, he whispered, "Can't you feel the vibe? This is where the real heavy hitters lurk." He swaggered up to the sticky counter, but the bartender sneered, barking that this grimy joint was no playground for rich brats. He warned the kid to take a hint and scramble before things got ugly. Without blinking, Lucien slammed a heavy pouch of gold onto the wood, casually wondering out loud what kind of trashy pub had a bartender acting so ridiculously picky. He slowly pulled back his hood, raising an eyebrow. Did I misread the room or what? Honestly, there were a few solid reasons why he hadn't completely destroyed that arrogant head maid yet. Reason number one, she was way more than just the staff boss. She was the literal daughter of the wet nurse who had practically spoon-fed Geordie since day one. If Lucien even laid a finger on her, he would just be dragging himself into a massive, unnecessary dumpster fire. Reason number two, Lucien's own faction was an absolute train wreck, way messier than he ever expected. And when you are drowning in that level of chaos, your payback needs to be just as ruthless. But the real kicker, there was literally zero chance the Grand Duke was completely blind to all this drama. Translation: scrubbing this mess clean was definitely just another brutal test. Time to flex his true worth. The second that shiny gold hit the counter, the bartender pulled a complete 180. Suddenly playing the perfect host, the guy practically worshipped the ground Lucien walked on, escorting him straight to a high-stakes table, snatching up the deck. Lucien figured he might as well bleed this place dry. Hours vanished. He completely wiped out yet another challenger, and soon a massive crowd swarmed them, hyped up and staring at Lucien like he was a god. His opponent stared at his empty hands in pure shock. Lucien just smirked. "Wait, you were tapped out. I was literally just warming up. Come on, don't you want to go one more round?" The guy aggressively shook his head, terrified of losing the shirt off his back. Meanwhile, Hans was practically hyperventilating. Staring at the mountain of chips, he clutched his head, desperately whispering, "Since when are you a literal card shark?" Kicking his boots up on the table, Lucien lazily yelled out for fresh meat. "Seriously, is there really no one in this dump who can give me a real challenge? I followed the hype down here, but you guys are completely boring me." As he admired his fat stacks of cash, he figured it was finally time to trigger the next phase of his master plan. Bam! The heavy back doors violently slammed open. Lucien shifted his gaze, smugly thinking, right on the freaking dot. Smoothing down his sharp collar, a massive dude strolled up with a dangerous grin, smoothly apologizing for totally ignoring such a VIP and letting him fly under the radar for so long. He introduced himself as Hugo, the top dog running this entire underground joint. With one sharp snap of his fingers, his bouncers ruthlessly, yet quietly shoved every single patron out the door. Hugo shrugged, mentioning that clearing the room might be a bit of a buzzkill for the regulars, but he literally could not care less. The only thing that actually mattered was ensuring young Master Lucien got the absolute royal treatment he deserved. Lucien scoffed. "I have been totally off the grid for ages, yet you somehow pinned me instantly. Then again, if your radar was not that sharp, you would probably be dead in the gutter by now." Hugo bowed again, apologizing for the holdup, but Lucien just waved him off. "Chill, I am just here to blow off some steam." Hugo's eyes locked onto the towering stacks of winnings, his voice dripping with awe. "Absolutely insane. It has been a minute since someone completely cleaned house like this. Mind if I personally step up to the plate?" Flashing a shark-like grin, Hugo admitted he was probably out of his league, but running a den of thieves definitely taught him a few dirty tricks. "How about we kill a little time together?" Hans immediately felt the bad vibes and frantically begged Lucien to cash out. "We secured the bag, let's just bounce. This dude is giving me seriously cursed energy." Having survived the toxic snake pit of the royal palace, Hans knew a dead man's stare when he saw one. Lucian sized Hugo up internally, noting that his loyal servant's survival instincts were actually razor sharp, and he was totally spot on. Hugo the Black Shark, a name destined to absolutely break the entire criminal underworld. This monster clawed his way up from the filthiest, blood-soaked back alleys of the city. Starting with zero but pure, unadulterated savage, he carved a path of terror and mind games until he was utterly untouchable. He skyrocketed to the top, violently snatching up underground casinos, black market smuggling rings, and even elite hitman contracts. And just like that, he crowned himself the absolute king of the night, ruling the terrifying Shadow Empire across the entire 5 territories. Down the line, when the empire finally crumbles, this guy capitalizes on the chaos to snatch up a barren title, and claws his way up to Imperial General. Right now, he's just a nobody rookie. But damn, Hans totally called it. This dude is incredibly dangerous, and today, he's out to reel in a massive whale. He casually pitches a simple card game, making it sound like a totally chill vibe. The catch: he wants to play completely no limit. He claims he just doesn't want the esteemed young master getting bored during his VIP visit. Lucian smacks his fist into his palm, absolutely hyped. Love that energy, he praises. Finally, a guy he can actually vibe with. Hugo flashes a slit grin, purring that it's an absolute coasting entirely on his family name. Little does Hugo know setting up this trap. He is practically tying his own execution knot. Hugo shoots a sly glance at the dealer, thinking this scenario is pure gold. Draining a VIP dry wasn't the original scheme, but entitled rich kids always chase their losses. He fully plans to milk this clueless kid for every single penny. Suddenly, our MC stops acting like he just forgot his basic manners. Hugo blinks, totally thrown off guard, and nervously asks if something's wrong. Lucian waves it off. Nah, we're all good. But before the cards drop, he just needs to ask one tiny question. You don't mind, right? Hugo pastes, swearing he's an open book. Lucian chuckles, saying they literally just met, but he's already a huge fan. You can spot a boss by how his crew moves. Running an underground hustle like this, it's not for the weak. If you crossed any major lines, my family's hounds would have wiped you off the map ages ago. Hugo smooths it over, insisting he knows his place, staying firmly off the higher-ups' radar. Lucian just cracks up. Dude, chill. I might be a wall deck, but we don't just execute people for fun. So, be real with me. When does the mass production drop? Hugo freezes, playing totally clueless. Lucian immediately shuts that down. Drop the act. I'm talking about your little side hustle in Vestra. You know, the illegal hallucinogens. The second those words hit the air, Hugo goes pale, and the room goes dead silent. The staff are absolutely shook while Hans starts freaking out. Hugo stammers, sweating bullets. Young sir, what are you even talking about, hallucinogens? What is that? Lucian just stares him down. Hugo heard him perfectly. So why play these games? Didn't the Marquis of Logren put you on payroll? Lucian snickers, exposing the whole scheme to ruin Waldeck from the inside by flooding the streets with narcotics. Who knew the Marquis was pathetic enough to use such a dirty, low-blow tactic? Some lines just shouldn't be crossed, right? Actually, nah. Hugo is definitely the mastermind here. Because honestly, it takes a massive ego to pull a stunt like this right in Waldeck territory. Idiots like him always think they're untouchable. Well, his cover is officially blown. Messing with Waldeck is a literal death wish. In the original timeline, this secret would have stayed buried for another 2 years. The Duke would have eventually gotten a report about the massive drug problem in his domain. He would have raided the place, sure, but Hugo would have already ghosted the city. Thankfully, past screw-ups make for great cheat codes. Hugo practically folds in half, desperately claiming it's a massive misunderstanding. He whines that he's just a struggling merchant barely scraping by. How could he ever push heavy stuff like that? Shaking like a leaf, he shrieks that some jealous haters are definitely spreading toxic rumors to ruin him. Just give me a chance. I'll hunt down whoever started this, he begs. Lucian tilts his head unfazed and asks again. So, it's all just fake news, right? That little rice mill you run is totally legit. And that massive underground tunnel beneath it is just, what an emergency exit, I'll ask you one last time. How far along is the operation? Pure terror completely paralyzes Hugo. He actually knows about the front business, the secret tunnels. If he has this much intel, lying his way out is impossible. A dark thought creeps in. Maybe I should just end him here. This arrogant noble is sitting right there, a sitting duck for a quick assassination. As a waiter subtly reaches for a concealed blade, Lucian throws him a chilling look. I'd think really hard before twitching. Hans is practically sobbing in terror, while Lucian coldly reminds Hugo that his life is literally hanging by a thread. He needs to move smart, considering all the blood, sweat, and tears it took to build this empire. Reality slaps Hugo in the face, attacking the Waldeck heir. That's literally a one-way ticket to the guillotine. Swallowing his pride to save his own skin, he drops straight to his knees, begging for his life. Lucian smirks. If he just wanted him dead, he wouldn't have bothered showing up in person. Hugo starts bawling hysterically, screaming that if Lucian needs a loyal dog, he's ready to put on. Tell me to bark, and I'll bark. Tell me to crawl, and I'll crawl. Just please, spare my life, young master. Taking the cue, every single servant crashes to the floor, desperately pleading for mercy. Lucian casually flipped through the chips on the table before slamming one down. He smirked, pointing out that a loyal dog would never bite its owner's hand, and right now he desperately needed some raw muscle. Hugo's eyes lit up. Hell yes, just say the word, boss, and it's done, he barked out, hyped beyond belief. Lucian just chuckled. But where's the fun in that? Honestly, you don't strike me as a guy who's cool with just being someone's guard dog. Grabbing Hugo by the shoulders, Lucian locked eyes with him. Hugo, he dropped the heavy question, how bad do you want to be a knight? Hugo froze absolutely speechless. The words echoed in his brain. A knight. Him. He used to obsess over that dream like a total maniac, but eventually he had thrown in the towel because over time, reality had crushed those hopes into dust. It didn't matter how hard he grinded or how many times he put his life on the line for his superiors. At the end of the day, he was nothing but a disposable pawn for the rich. His trash tier background was a curse he couldn't shake off, no matter what he did. So did he want the title? His knees gave out, collapsing to the floor as the raw truth hit him. He'd literally sell his soul to the devil for that chance. Voice trembling, he asked if it was actually possible. Without missing a beat, Lucian swore on the very honor of the Waldeck bloodline. He promised he possessed enough pride and dignity to never go back on his word. His peasant status wouldn't hold him back anymore. Wouldn't you rather live like a real human instead of a throwaway weapon? Hugo shot him a secretive, measuring glance. Fast forward a few days. The morning sun crept in as the entire manor staff lined up waiting for Lucian to drop some major news. He smirked, introducing the absolute unit he'd just brought into the fold. A ruthless top-tier brawler hired from the streets. Go on, tell them who you are, Lucian. Stepping up, Hugo boldly announced his name. He declared that from today onward he belonged to the young master, adding a stiff promise to get along with everyone. Crickets chirped in the heavy, awkward silence. He started slow clapping. All right, icebreakers are over. Now go fetch the head maid here, he demanded. One of the servants scoffed. The head maid. Why do you need her? Lucian raised an eyebrow. Why do you think she needs to pay her respects to the new guy? Plus, we really don't want a repeat of her toxic tantrums, do we? The staff grumbled that they'd have to report to the busy head maid first. Lucian smirked internally. These clowns were acting exactly how he predicted. Playing Mr. Nice Guy with this disrespectful crew was off the table. Honestly, a blind man could see that. To them, the young heir was just a rotting safety net, useless and doomed to snap. Well, if they wanted to play it that way, he was about to beat some respect into their thick skulls. A snarky servant stepped up, telling Lucian to read the room. Everyone knew Lord Geordie had the head maid wrapped around his finger. So who did Lucian think he was to boss her around? The rest of the peanut gallery started chiming in, backing up the disrespect, whining that he needed to back off. Why was he trying to start drama? They just wanted to vibe and keep things chill like the good old days. That was the final straw for Hans. He completely snapped, screaming at the staff to shut their mouths and stand at attention. Had they suffered massive memory loss? The rightful boss of this estate was young Lord Lucian, absolutely not the second master. Hugo stepped in, placing a massive hand on Hans's shoulder. Let me handle this, he rumbled. Using actual logic on these losers he gave Lucian a crisp bow, shooting him a knowing smirk. The assignment was crystal clear. It'd be child's play to literally beat some loyalty into these arrogant punks. Hugo grinned. But things might get a little messy. I'm just asking for the green light, boss. Lucian couldn't hold back a dark chuckle. Man, you catch on quick. This right here, This is exactly why I put you on the payroll." He silently thanked his lucky stars that Hugo's addiction was barely scratching the surface. If the big guy had spiraled any deeper, saving him would have been impossible. Lucian clamped a hand on his massive shoulder. "Permission absolutely granted. Go." "Music to my ears." Hugo cracked his knuckles. "Sit back, boss. I'm about to give you one hell of a show." "Consider it done," Hugo replied coldly. As the servant stared in sheer bewilderment, the towering beast stalked straight toward him. The guy was absolutely terrified by Hugo's sheer size. Up close, the brute was practically blocking out the sun, radiating pure, unadulterated nightmare fuel. "He's just some filthy street rat, right? Trying to play tough," the servant hissed that Hugo was sticking his nose where it didn't belong. "You don't know how things work around here," he threatened quietly. "You better pick the winning team. Do you have any idea how ruthless Lord Geordie is? Geordie holds all the cards in this house. You really want to throw your life away for some pocket change?" Hugo slowly clenched his massive fist until his knuckles popped. The servant blinked, his voice cracking. "Wait, what are you—" But before the idiot could finish his sentence, Hugo unloaded a brutal right hook straight into his face. The impact sent the guy flying like a rag doll, smashing violently onto the hard floor. The rest of the staff gasped, as they watched their co-worker skid violently across the room. Even Hans was completely blindsided, his jaw literally dropping to the floor. Meanwhile, Lucian smiled, genuinely, touched by the beautiful chaos. Hugo glared down at the absolutely wrecked servant. The guy's teeth were practically pulverized, his jaw swelling purple, spitting up thick mouthfuls of blood. Total chaos erupted. The rest of the staff started shrieking, pointing, shaking fingers at Hugo. Like, what was his deal? Why go completely psycho? Sure, the young master dragged him in here, but did this musclehead seriously think he could just do whatever he wanted? Hugo just scoffed, claiming he had every right. His main specialty, disciplining absolute idiots. A second later, the battered servant groaned weakly, trying to prop himself up. The room exploded into a deafening uproar again, as two massive guards suddenly locked their grips onto Jenny's arms. She thrashed around, screeching at them to let her go. Did they honestly think they could pull a stunt like this? The guards just barked at her to shut her mouth, but she was still completely clueless about the reality check coming her way. Jenny's face burned red with rage. How dare some low-level grunt bark orders at her? Oh, he was absolutely going to pay for this. But right as she was popping off, they shoved her straight into Lucian's quarters. Her jaw hit the floor. Every single servant was glued to the ground, kneeling in absolute terror. She froze completely shell-shocked by the ghost-white faces of her crew. One of the guards bowed low. "Young Master Lucian, we brought the head maid just as you ordered." Lucian casually stood gazing out the window. He slowly pivoted, flashing a chilling smile. "Ah, you brought her." He had literally just asked them to escort her in. But it looked like his squad went a little too hardcore. Jenny instantly started screeching. What the hell was the meaning of this? Did he seriously think he was untouchable? If this was some pathetic flex to scare her, he was dead wrong. Master Geordie was absolutely going to destroy him for this. If he backed off right this second, she might actually let it slide. Our main character just let out a dark chuckle. Who said anything about stopping? He gripped a heavy leather whip, his voice dropping dead serious. "We're just getting to the good part." Honestly, the maid could yap all she wanted. It literally didn't matter, because she was never leaving this room alive. He stalked toward her, his face completely hollow and terrifying. Historically speaking, a public execution has always been the ultimate power move, the absolute best way to send a brutal message. He had the perfect excuse. His objective was locked in, and most importantly, the sheer trauma would stick with them forever. Basically, he didn't need to fire the entire staff. Snuffing out the head maid was more than enough. He locked eyes with the trembling Jenny. Today he was using her to send a massive warning label straight to the Duke. The message. The pathetic. Weakling third son was officially dead and gone. He flicked his fingers, signaling a guard, who instantly grabbed Jenny's shoulders and slammed her violently down onto her knees. Hyperventilating, he threatened to take her life, but did he seriously think Master Geordie would just sit on the sidelines if she got so much as a scratch? After all, her mom literally raised Geordie as his nanny, making them practically brother and sister. Lucian just stood there, letting a heavy, suffocating silence fill the room, until his voice finally cut through the tension. Was that seriously the best she could come up with for her dying breath? If this was her grand finale, what a pathetic waste to spend it clinging to some fake brotherly bond, right up to the bitter end. Wasn't she embarrassed? If she was hiding some secret weapon, now was the time to drop it. She gasped his name, but the words totally died in her throat. Lucian coldly reminded the head maid that she was dead wrong. He had a laundry list of reasons to wipe her off the map, from disrespecting high society to pure laziness stirring up drama, stealing straight from the treasury, you name it. She completely lost touch with reality just because a nanny spoon-fed her. What did she honestly expect her golden boy Geordie to do about it? Best case scenario, he'd throw a quick tantrum, swing a couple of punches and cool off. But the second his dad stepped into the ring, Geordie would freeze up completely. Honestly, the old man might actually reward Lucian for finally silencing this arrogant brat. Absolute terror paralyzed her. She couldn't even squeak. Lucian snapped that Geordie was just another heir in line, exactly like the guy staring her down right now. He tossed her a lifeline earlier, but she chose to drag things straight to hell. Her hands shook violently as she stuttered out a broken apology. She begged young master, "Please, have mercy." He just stared at her with dead eyes and whispered, "Just chalk it up to rotten luck." A split second later, the sharp crack of a whip echoed. Blood splattered across the floor. Cut to the next morning. Geordie sprinted down the grand hallways like a madman, frantic, mumbling over and over that this had to be that it was absolutely impossible. Literally just a few days ago, Lucian tucked his tail between his legs, when Jenny publicly clowned him, and now he's suddenly snapped and out for blood. And it gets even weirder. Normally, Geordie would just deploy his goons to Lucian's rundown shack. The staff would always jump in to block him. So if things escalated this fast, it meant Lucian had somehow flipped the entire staff to his side. Bursting into the room, his men panicked. "Sir, the intel has to be wrong. Please take a breath." But a guy nearby nodded grimly, confirming the nightmare was real. Because knowing Lucian's true colors, there was zero chance he'd lay a single finger on anyone. Plus the guy was absolutely terrified of Sir Geordie. But honestly, Geordie could smell the cap from a mile away. Something was... Suddenly, a blood-curdling shriek ripped through the air. He kicked the door off its hinges, only to freeze at the gruesome sight, a crimson-stained whip tearing into Jenny's battered skin. Hugo had her pinned by the shoulders, while Lucian brutally lashed her spine. Geordie's jaw ticked with absolute fury, as he snarled, demanding to know what the hell was going on. Lucian casually glanced over his shoulder. "Well, well, what brings you to my corner?" he mocked. "You'll have to excuse the mess, brother. I'm a little tied up at the moment. Maybe swing by later. I'm currently busy ripping this filthy infection out by its roots." He barked an order for Hugo to drag her to her feet. The loyal knight didn't hesitate, immediately hauling the sobbing maid upward. Panic flashing in his eyes, Geordie roared at his muscle. The two bodyguards grunted in agreement and bolted straight toward the bloody scene. But Lucian didn't even flinch. He coldly commanded Hugo, "If those dogs take even 3 steps closer, carve her throat open. I'll take the fall for the mess." Hearing that absolute lack of mercy, the rushing guards slammed on the brakes, paralyzed with shock. Hugo flashed a sadistic grin. "Don't worry, my lord. She's leaving this room in a body bag." To prove his point, he dug the razor-sharp steel right into her jugular, drawing a fresh bead of crimson. Trembling like a leaf, Jenny sobbed desperately, begging. Geordie lost his mind. "Drop the blade, you bastard. Do it right now, or I will personally sever your head. I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth and mount your skull on the estate walls." Hugo merely scoffed at the massive death threat. "Yeah, that's gonna be a no from me, buddy. My only master is Lord Lucian. I don't take orders from strangers. Whatever happens next is above my pay grade. My job is to execute my lord's commands, and I'm very good at my job." Geordie's fists shook violently as his knuckles turned ghost white. He whipped his furious gaze back to Lucian. What the hell did she even do to deserve this butchery? Lucian shrugged carelessly. She disrespected her superiors, ignored my direct commands, and lied straight to my face. I'm just serving up some instant karma. You really need to stop letting your feelings cloud business, brother. That condescending jab practically made blood vessels pop in Geordie's forehead. Here's the tea on the Waldeck house. The eldest son, Tristan, and the second son, Geordie, are currently locked in a brutal, cutthroat war for the family throne. So until that final showdown happens, Geordie desperately needs to flex his power and stack his allies. But Lucian just dragged him through the mud in front of everyone. That public humiliation cost Geordie massive political points, not to mention losing his elite knight, Hendrik. If he totally fails to protect Jenny, his absolute right-hand woman, it's going to be a massive disaster. The moment he looks weak, paranoia and doubt will instantly infect his entire faction. Bottom line, he's totally checkmated. Gritting his teeth, Geordie finally spat out, "Fine, you win. Let the girl go." The entire room went dead silent. Every single servant's jaw dropped in absolute disbelief. Even Hans looked shell-shocked as Jenny broke down and Lucian just stared at him, letting the heavy silence drag out. This guy has got to be kidding, he thought. He really thinks he can sweep this under the rug with a quick, "I yield," after illegally raiding my territory and stealing my assets. Does he think his words are literal gold? Rich kids really live in their own delusional bubble. Feigning pure innocence, Lucian tilted his head. "I have no idea what you're talking about, bro. Win. What game are we playing? I'm just doing my job as the third son of this house. Oh, and a quick reality check: embezzlement is a hardcore felony. Nobody gets a free pass on that, no matter how fancy their title is. If we just magically forget this happened, the rumors would be toxic. Now if my beloved older brother is actually begging me on his knees, I'd love to look the other way, but my hands are totally tied here." Hearing that fake apology, Geordie was practically vibrating with pure, unadulterated rage. "Cut the crap," he snarled. "Just name your damn price." Lucian smirked. "Well, history has a pretty clear rule about this. When you trespass and steal another man's bag, you don't just say sorry, you pay up. Usually a massive multiplier of whatever you tried to snatch." Geordie glared at him, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Exactly how much are we talking about?" Cut to a few hours later, as a new dawn broke over the estate. Lord Sigmund stood by his massive window, staring out at the grounds with a heavy, unreadable expression. Thinking back on how the insane midnight drama wrapped up, he glanced at his head butler. "Is the intel accurate?" The old man bowed respectfully. "Yes, my lord. Second Master Geordie paid a staggering ransom, exactly 10 times the stolen amount to be exact. Furthermore, Lord Lucian immediately used that cash to hire a rogue mercenary named Hugo to violently purge every single spy from his wing. Right now, the Third Master's territory is an absolute fortress. It's locked down tighter than the royal vault." Processing that crazy power shift, Sigmund finally signaled for the guards to open the doors. Lucian swaggered into the grand office, casually giving a crisp textbook bow with his hand over his heart. He waited for the old man to speak. Sigmund slowly turned around, his piercing eyes locking onto his son. He couldn't help but notice the absolute icy confidence in the boy's gaze now. "You've been making a lot of loud waves recently," the patriarch noted. Lucian didn't even blink. "Just doing a little spring cleaning, sir. I merely disciplined a rabid dog that forgot who holds the leash." "Maybe," Sigmund countered, "but you dragged your older brother's pride through the dirt in the process. He is going to hold a massive grudge over this. Are you actually prepared for that kind of ruthless blowback?" Lucian scoffed, a dark smile playing on his lips. "There's no fallout to worry about. I was simply taking out the trash and restoring basic order. Honestly, backing down just because I was scared of his little temper tantrum would have been the real disgrace. There was no way he'd dragged the Waldeck name through the mud. He just made a call that kept their reputation totally spotless." His old man leaned in, dropping a bombshell. If Geordie kept throwing hands, Lucian had total clearance to hit back hard. But there was a massive catch. If their beef blew up and damaged the family's rep, Big Bad Dad was backing Geordie, 0 questions asked, no matter who started it. Lucian blinked, completely thrown off. Wait, what the heck did that even mean? Where was this coming from? His father just scoffed. Why look so shocked? Sure, Geordie had been chilling overseas, but he had actually brought massive value to the table, unlike some people. Lucian had basically been ghosting his duties for a solid year. As the boss of this whole operation, backing the guy pulling his weight was just basic math. The gears turned in Lucian's head. Wait a minute. Reading between the lines, this wasn't a warning. It was a green light to totally body his brother and steal the spotlight. His dad's eyes locked onto him. He needed to level up his power and prove he wasn't dead weight. Only then would everything click into place. Oh, it made total sense now. The old man was cranking up the pressure just to light a massive fire under him. Plus, throwing down an ultimatum like that meant only one thing. The bloodbath for the heir apparent was kicking off. Like he was basically telling Lucian to stop slacking and grab the bag before someone else snatched it up. Seriously, were all dads this intense? Well, if the big guy was losing sleep over his potential, it was time to put on a show. Without missing a beat, Lucian slid a stack of papers from his coat. He locked eyes with his dad. "What if I told you I'm already making moves?" He tossed the documents onto the desk, smirking. "And it's a massive play, by the way. Honestly, he was eating this up. Sigmund's eyes scanned the pages. Suddenly his grip tightened, practically crushing the paper. Are you absolutely certain these intel drops are legit? If this was some hyped-up stunt just to score brownie points, he better confess right this second. Lucian didn't even blink. It's 100% On top of that, they'd bagged a rat pushing shady contraband right in their turf. And the puppet master, the rival house of Legrand. He could bring the guy in for a chat right now. But before he could finish, a terrifying shockwave of raw, unadulterated magic erupted from his dad. Sigmund roared, his voice shaking the walls. How dare that arrogant punk from the Marquis estate even think about flexing on Waldeck territory? The air turned to lead. Lucian was literally gasping for breath. This was the Empire's ultimate weapon, the apex predator of House Waldeck unleashed. Holy crap, he was actually going to pass out. Fighting the crushing gravity, Lucian gasped, begging for just 10 seconds to speak. The monstrous aura flared. Spit it out, what? Lucian choked out the reality check. Snitching to the Emperor was useless. The Lograns would just snake their way out. They were running this whole black market operation through ghost companies. On paper, their hands were squeaky clean. Plus, even if they pushed for a deep dive, the Emperor was terrified of a bloody civil war. He'd instantly shut it down to keep the peace. Sigmund's rage paused for a split second. Wait, since when did his slacker son become a political mastermind? Lucian kept rolling. Basically, even after spitting in Waldeck's face, the worst hit the Lograns would take was Lucian. Don't you think we should make them bleed for this instead? Dead silence swallowed the room. The insane pressure vanished. Sigmund slowly sank back into his heavy chair. Walk me through this master plan of yours. Lucian's smirk returned. It was a checkmate move guaranteeing 0 survivors. And the board was already set. Just recently, one of their top-tier insiders flipped and came crying to him. The guy was a total nobody on paper, but he had totally finessed the Lograns, gaining crazy levels of trust and climbing all the way up to head steward. It suddenly clicked for Sigmund. That random guy the butler mentioned earlier, he was a planted mole. Did his wildcard third son... Are you weaponizing this rat to spring a counter-ambush? Lucian nodded. Bingo. The enemy would never see a knife in the back coming, especially from the exact guy managing their precious supply chains. He'd spoon-fed them just enough success to make them arrogant. Now a massive VIP from House Legrand was going to be forced out of hiding and right into their crosshairs. Talk about a massive flex. But there was a glaring red flag in this setup. Sigmund called him out. He was gambling the whole operation on a literal backstabber from the gutter. You cannot just rewrite human nature, kid. Once a snake, always a snake. He warned Lucian never to turn his back on a wild card. But Lucian's smile only grew colder. I don't trust the guy at all, Lucian said smoothly. I trust his greed. Sigmund frowned. The guy was desperate to become a knight, Lucian explained. He wanted his name screaming across the Empire. He wanted to carve his legacy into the history books. Sigmund scoffed, calling the guy completely delusional about his social standing. Exactly, Lucian agreed. But it wasn't just a dream. It was a psychotic, burning obsession, and that made him the perfect pawn. Still, he chose to lock in and trust his gut. He had banked on this exact feeling in his past life, even though his dad coldly brushed it off as just being way too sentimental. But what happens if you totally fumble this? His father challenged. Lucian didn't even flinch. He fired right back, vowing he wouldn't ghost his responsibilities if things went south. A subordinate screw-up falls completely on the boss. He swore he'd pay the ultimate price, even if it meant literally putting his own neck on the chopping block. His dad just soaked it all in, completely stone-faced. Then he calmly ordered Lucian to report straight to the training grounds the absolute second he was healed. Totally caught off guard, Lucian asked what the heck that was supposed to mean. His father dropped an absolute bombshell. He was going to teach him the legendary lion. Why? Because our boy had finally leveled up to become a prime candidate for the next head of the family. A few hours later, pitch black night rolled in, and we cut to Sigmund quietly flipping through a book. A servant nervously crept up to him, looking absolutely gutted and begging for forgiveness. Right here deep in the absolute core of the Waldeck territory. You let this slip right under our noses, Sigmund snapped, his voice slicing through the tension. Enough. I literally ordered you to lock down the border. He knew damn well the guy was barely treading water with just that one job. Everyone would chalk it up to pure dumb luck that the third son snagged this intel first, especially since Bernhard had been busting his back to stay totally off the radar. This wasn't some basic cash grab or power trip. Dude was chasing absolute glory. Lord Sigmund locked in on the reality. Bernhard was definitely hoarding this dirt to scheme right in front of His Majesty, down the line. Seriously, how could that slimy Marquis only care about saving his own neck, knowing exactly how messed up the Empire was right now? But honestly, the bigger mystery was Hugo. Who exactly was this heavy hitter teaming up with the third son? On paper, he was just some sketchy thug running a mountain lodge. But behind closed doors, the man was the absolute mastermind of a massive black market syndicate. Even the absolute worst of the criminal underworld tipped their hats to him. Dude just did not give off follower vibes. At all. Yet Lucian straight up tracked this boss down and flipped him into a loyal dog. The young master was leveling up at a terrifying pace. Sigmund mentally replayed the man's brutal climb to the top of the underworld. If Hugo was the type to fall for cheap talk and fake hype, he would have been crushed years ago. No, he definitely saw raw, unfiltered potential radiating from Lucian. The kind of top-tier potential you actually gamble your life on. Sigmund muttered that this was speeding up the timeline, but whatever the third son had secured the win. And now it was time to put him on the true path. He was ready to unlock the family's most guarded secret combat arts for him. Fast forward to the next morning. His right-hand man nodded, totally hyping up the call. Solid move, boss. Do you already have a blade master in mind? Sigmund didn't even blink. I'm calling in Sir Aeson. The servant literally choked on his own breath at that name drop, but Sigmund kept his cool. Yeah, it feels kind of grimy dragging the legend out of retirement, he admitted. But trust me, this kid is going to make it worth every single second of his time. Meanwhile, the entire estate was buzzing with insane rumors. Hans practically broke his neck turning around. Wait, bro, what did you just say? You're messing with me, right? You seriously locked in the official heir spot? Lucian just rolled his eyes. Dude, how many times do I have to spell it out before it clicks? He leaned over, whispering to Hugo. Please do something about this guy before I lose my mind. Hugo casually hoisted Hans up by the collar like a rag doll. Chill out, man, he rumbled. With the boss's insane specs, wasn't this guaranteed from day one? Plus, looking at the crazy grind ahead, his literal right-hand man shouldn't be shaking like a leaf. Hans froze, eyes popping. Wait, I'm the right hand. Absolute stars formed in his eyes, and the dude legit started bawling happy tears. What do you even mean by right hand? Like, yeah, I've been riding with the boss since day one, but I'm basically a total noob. Especially with an absolute beast like you standing right here. How am I supposed to compete with that? Hugo just smirked, completely unfazed. Humble, as always. Exactly what I'd expect from the senior guy. Hans furiously wiped his face. Okay, shut up already. Watching this chaotic duo, Lucian couldn't help but realize that hardcore veteran mercs were built totally different. Catching their attention, he firmly told Hans that Hugo wasn't capping. He had specifically chosen to drop this massive bomb on just the two of them, way before the official estate drop. Lucian studied Hans intently. Yeah, the guy was a massive softie, and in their brutal world, that sweet nature could be a fatal flaw. But his loyalty was absolutely bulletproof. He had the sheer guts to stick by Lucian's side when everything else was crashing and burning. So if Hans just grinded for some real-world experience and actually leveled up his management skills, he would morph into the ultimate god-tier support. And as for Hugo, his raw stats were undeniably off the charts. Lucian just needed to unlock the Knight class for him. Once that gate was open, Hugo's true terrifying potential would absolutely explode. He would forge him into his ultimate vanguard, a fiercely loyal blade that destroyed anything in their path. Forget having an army. Elite quality over garbage quantity. Now it was just a matter of grinding their stats to the max. Lucian locked eyes with his crew. Listen up. From this second on, the grind is going to be hell. I can't solo this next raid. If we're going to survive what's coming, I need you both operating at peak. Hugo slammed a fist over his heart. I won't let you down, boss. Hans scrambled to agree, swearing they had his back. Fast forward. Brilliant morning sunlight absolutely flooded the massive training hall. Lucian swaggered right into the dead center of the room, memories of his brutal past life flashing behind his eyes. Back then, he had literally ripped continents apart, searching for one single holy grail, the hidden core of ancient combat arts. The mythical cheat code said to shatter the absolute limits of mortal swordsmanship. Aura Blade Arts. And sitting at the absolute peak of that mountain, the ultimate god-tier master strikes. But back then, after shedding rivers of blood and sweat, what did he get? Nothing even close to those mythical arts. Forget the ultimate moves, he couldn't even scrape up the mid-tier skills that standard knight captains casually tossed around. He was stuck with garbage, entry-level scraps meant for rookies. Because the brutal truth, real power was brutally gate-kept by noble blood. And for a filthy no-name mercenary like him, even catching a glimpse of those secret manuals was absolutely impossible. Meanwhile, complete trash-tier nobles spammed high-ranking moves, completely crushing his raw skill with sheer, unfair force. And every single time he watched his crew get slaughtered because he wasn't strong enough, a toxic, blinding rage consumed him to unlock real power. But now, the universe had just handed a guy like him the ultimate, unexpected cheat code, a legendary combat technique locked exclusively behind the bloodline of House Waldeck and his inner circle, an ancient art that completely wipes the floor with any advanced skill. He was actually getting a shot to master the art of the lion's heart. Absolute chills. His nerves were completely fried. Even though they hadn't even kicked things off, and class was still hours away, the sheer anticipation was eating him alive. He had been glued to this exact spot since the crack of dawn. He seriously needed to chill before the lesson actually started. Back in his past life, he was totally off the rails. Zero discipline. He basically clawed his way up by hijacking moves, spilling blood, and scraping together whatever. A legit mentor was completely out of the question back then. But this second life, it was an absolute game changer. A faint smile curled on his lips as he locked his eyes dead ahead, staying perfectly rooted to the floor. Flocks of birds darted past the window, and when Aizen spotted him from a distance, it hit him hours had practically evaporated, and the kid hadn't even twitched. What exactly sparked this crazy shift? That pathetic, weak aura, completely wiped out. It instantly dragged his mind back to a recent chat with Sigmund, who totally dropped a bomb by ordering him to be Lucian's mentor. At first he thought the kid was a complete lost cause, but zooming in a bit closer, he actually caught a glimpse of something fascinating. At the very least, it would be a solid source of entertainment. Aizen had fired back that if his lord commanded it, the boy's latent talent must be totally insane. Sigmund had spoken up, visibly caught off guard by his vibe, telling him he would understand exactly what the hype was about once he witnessed it in the flesh. And now, as Aizen analyzed him from the sidelines, everything suddenly clicked. This was the literal sword saint who was about to train him. A sword saint is an absolute superhuman unit, fully awakened by shattering the absolute limits of mana circulation. The highest possible tier for someone who peaked in swordsmanship. A title so insanely rare, it barely exists in the Empire's massive history. The man is a literal walking god among blades, and this living legend was standing right in front of him. Stepping right into Lucian's line of sight, the sword saint dipped into a smooth bow. It has been quite a while, third young master. Not since the Lord's birthday. From this day forward, he was officially taking over as his mentor. He told the boy to just call him Aizen Brightener. The second Lucian laid eyes on him, it finally clicked. Hans had dropped a major hint that morning about a veteran knight who dedicated his life to the Waldeck bloodline. But how on earth did he casually leave out the fact that this was the actual sword saint? He immediately dropped into a deep bow. It is an absolute honor to be molded by the sword saint himself, he declared, begging for his intense guidance. Aizen casually waved off the hype. That title is just overblown nonsense. I am honestly just a washed-up old man. Besides, you are the legitimate heir. It completely ruins your image to bow your head like that. Lucian instantly fired back, that while he obviously shouldn't drag the family name through the mud, how could he possibly hold back his respect? He wanted to completely toss the social hierarchy out the window. This man totally earned that respect. In that split second, a flicker of genuine hope sparked in Aizen's eyes. Well, if you are going to be that stubborn about it, do whatever you want. Lucian practically beamed, thanking him for being cool about it. And with that, they kicked off the hellish training. Aizen motioned toward the dirt arena, smirking. How about we start with a little jog around the grounds? The protagonist didn't even flinch, locking into the zone and deciding to just move, without throwing a single question his way. Aizen was completely stunned. Whoa, hold up, he demanded. The kid didn't have a single question, like why run? For how long? What was the actual point of running in circles? Lucian shot him a deadpan look, admitting that, yeah, the curiosity was definitely gnawing at him. But since the master dropped an order, that was basically the law. He figured the old man had a hidden agenda, even if he kept his cards close to his chest. A student's only job is to blindly follow the master's lead. Aizen stared, fully absorbing the sheer weight in the kid's gaze. An absolute night and day contrast to the spoiled, whining young. This boy was actually starving for the blade. The old man's face lit up, completely hyping up his student's mindset. Now that is what I am talking about. Let the games begin. The second those words dropped, Lucian exploded into a full sprint, tearing straight into the arena. He started cranking out lap after lap, going completely try-hard mode. Honestly, there was a secret reason he played the obedient student. He had completely read the room on the true purpose of this cardio session. It was a raw vibe check to see if he was actually worthy of being a student, basically an undercover potential scan. He used to pull the exact same stunt, back in his glory days as a ruthless mercenary captain. He would hand the fresh meat some totally brutal, mindless task. Their split-second reactions would instantly expose what kind of person they really were. He shot a quick side-eye at Aizen, mentally grinning. He already nailed the attitude check. Now all he had to flex was pure, unadulterated endurance. He was dead set on running until his lungs gave out. Cut to a full 60 minutes later. He suddenly glanced down at his hands, completely mind-blown. What the hell is going on? This makes absolutely zero sense. He had been sprinting like a total maniac for an hour, yet he did not feel a single ounce of fatigue. Wildly enough, the longer he kept pushing, the lighter his body actually felt. He literally only chugged some bargain bin potion to heal up, and his so-called training was literally just taking basic walks. How on earth was this a thing? He just kept grinding out laps like a machine, while Aizen stood there, absolutely frozen, slowly realizing he only made the kid run to gauge his base stats, not witness a literal endless marathon. I totally expected his stamina to be absolute garbage, but this dude just shattered every law of physics. Not a single drop of sweat on him, and his breathing completely chilled out like a mirror glass lake. Even a hardened veteran knight who'd pumped mana for decades would be gasping for air right now. Was he actually pulling off the impossible? Mid-thought, the old man barked at the kid to hit the brakes, since they'd done enough sprinting for one afternoon. Lucian blinked, asking what was up, catching Aizen actively sparking his mana. The old master narrowed his eyes. Third young master, let me ask you one thing this morning. How exactly are you grounding your mind and body? Wasn't that mana circulation technique supposed to be a brutal meditation? Lucian shrugged, firing back, that if you meant that whole chaotic scene in the training yard, he was spot on. He was definitely running a circulation loop, and honestly, there was no better cheat code to clear your head. Aizen instantly realized how badly he'd misjudged the kid and requested permission to inspect his core. He warned him not to flinch, even if things got a little weird. Gripping the boy's hand, he pushed his magical energy into the kid's palm, only to freeze dead in his tracks. He had his suspicions, but just like him, the boy had already hit the absolute ceiling of mana circulation. Wait, no. For this kid, it wasn't a ceiling at all. He was miles past what Aizen himself had conquered. This absolute madman was paving a brand new path from scratch. After a tense silence, the old man dropped his hand and asked, "How long have you been doing this? When exactly did you finish forging your mana circles?" Lucian played dumb, asking what on earth he was talking about. Aizen sighed, admitting he'd just scanned his internal hardware. His core was as pure as freshly fallen snow, and his internal mana veins perfectly carved out to maximize energy flow, like an unstoppable water wheel. This was a god-tier state that only a tiny fraction of true grandmasters, the crazies who literally spent their entire lives grinding, could ever dream of unlocking. Lucian had totally anticipated a reaction like this, but his current build was basically flawless anyway, so playing hide-and-seek was pointless now. Plus, he had a ton of questions about his own physical limits, and if a literal sword saint couldn't give him answers, nobody could. Meeting the old man's intense gaze, he finally dropped the truth bomb. It had only been about 1 month since he started circulating his mana, and every single channel was wide open from day one. He'd always heard that forcing mana flow usually came with agonizing, bone-crushing pain, but honestly, he hadn't felt a single pinch. Aizen's jaw practically hit the floor. This kid had just blown his wildest expectations out of the way. It took him decades of brutal blood, sweat, and tears just to reach this checkpoint. Maybe those mythical ancient beasts who cleaved mountains and oceans in half weren't just fairy tales after all. Risking total disrespect, he stared intensely at the third sun, He pleaded with him to completely drop his claim to the family throne. Lucian was completely caught off guard. "What the hell are you talking about?" he snapped. Why on earth would he throw away his birthright to inherit the mighty house of Valdec? Was his physical vessel secretly corrupted or something? Was he doomed to be trash at swordsmanship? Would he explode if he flexed his mana? The old master shook his head. It was the exact opposite. His anatomy was an absolute masterpiece. Not only could he push his mana and muscle fibers to their absolute maximum limit, he had the insane potential to shatter the ceiling entirely. Simply put, if he went all in on the blade, snagging the title of the next Sword Saint would be a literal walk in the park. Aizen could practically see the kid ascending to the Sword Saint throne. He always knew Lucian's physical specs were cracked, but this was straight up glitching the Matrix. By some insane stroke of luck, the boy had mastered the legendary ancient Lionheart breathing style, and Lucian finally felt like he'd unlocked the ultimate path to the peak he'd ruthlessly chased in his past life. But he honestly never thought he'd get a sneak peek this deep into the mythical realm of a supreme swordsman. But it looked like that dream was getting permanently nerfed. He realized Aizen was forcing him to pick a lane, because dual classing as the political heir and a divine holy swordsman was completely off the table. Aizen nodded grimly. It was the hard truth, mostly because the old man's timer was running out fast. Thanks to his intense mana circulation, he could still blitz around like this despite pushing 100 years old. But he couldn't outrun Father Time forever. His body was decaying. If he wanted to download every ounce of his combat knowledge into the boy before kicking the bucket, they were on a brutally strict deadline, even if Lucian completely tunnel-visioned on his sword training. Because if memory served right, this holy swordsman only had 8 years left to live. The clock was viciously ticking. If he took the deal and pledged his soul to the blade, he'd be an absolute unit. But the rapidly approaching apocalyptic bloodbath headed for this world demanded more than just a sharp sword. True power belonged to the ones holding the throne when the dust settled. This was the exact crossroads he'd been waiting for. So, bowing his head slightly, he asked for the old and declared with absolute resolve that he was riding out this life as a true-blooded Valdec until his dying breath. The master had offered him the universe, and it crushed him to actually reject it. Aizen let out a self-deprecating chuckle, dragging himself for daring to put the third young master in such an awkward spot. After a wild youth, why was he suddenly getting so incredibly greedy right at the finish line? In the end, the dying legend just desperately wanted to leave his immortal legacy behind. The third son, Lucian, watched him walk away before dropping a massive question. What if there's someone else out there, with talent on par with yours? Meanwhile, cut to a flashy young master galloping up to the estate. His breathless servant sprinted over, blurting out that the crazy rumors about the third son were dead on. Joshua yanked his horse to a halt. What? You're telling me those bogus whispers are legit? That total loser just got named a valid heir. Utterly blindsided, Joshua vaulted off his horse as the servant doubled down on the painful truth. The Archduke had officially tossed his third son into the cutthroat race for the throne. To make matters worse, Lucian was now directly under the master's wing, grinding out daily sword training. Joshua's blood boiled. This guy was becoming an absolute menace to his plans. Dodging his two psycho older brothers was a nightmare already, and now the neutral nobles had a shiny new candidate to back. He slammed his towel onto the dirt and exploded. Was it seriously that impossible for that freak to just rot quietly in his room? The panicked servant begged him to chill and keep his voice down, but Joshua completely snapped. Watch my mouth. How am I supposed to stay zen right now? What if the squad I've busted my back to build starts jumping ship? Pure rage spiked in his veins at the sickening thought of having to respectfully call Lucian, a guy barely a few months older than him, his brother. No way. He wasn't about to just sit back and take the L. Whirling toward his butler, a dark smirk crept onto his face. Since little Lucian is playing swordsman now, he's gonna need a sparring partner real soon. Get 2 live steel blades ready. The butler's jaw dropped in absolute shock, but Joshua wasn't playing around. He coldly demanded actual lethal combat weapons, no pathetic wooden sticks. He was gonna drag this fake prodigy back to reality and show him who really ruled the food chain. Flashing back, Lucian pressed on. What if I can find you another disciple? It might take some serious digging, but I promise you a prodigy who will make up for all your wasted years. Someone destined to make the Holy Sword's legacy legendary for centuries. He was dead set on hunting down a generational anomaly. Aizen just chuckled, shaking his head. He confessed his heart was already heavy enough, knowing he'd unknowingly burned precious time on the third young master. The fact that the kid even cared about an old geezer like him was enough. Please don't stress over my legacy. I'm already incredibly touched by your loyalty. Lucian totally got it. He knew he sounded completely delusional. If world-class elites couldn't catch this master's eye, a total newbie spouting promises, while holding a sword for the very first time, must seem like a hilarious joke. But Lucian was about to test if his new vessel held the god-tier specs required to impress the sword saint. He knew the exact freak of nature who possessed that mythical blade talent. In his past life, despite having a terrifyingly fragile body and relying on absolutely caveman-level basics, that guy was the living, breathing avatar of steel butchering entire battlefields through raw, unhinged instinct alone. Felix the Sword Demon. He was Lucian's most lethal subordinate, and the perfect monster to inherit Aizen's ultimate techniques. But before setting off to find him, they needed to reality check Lucian's own hardware. The drill was simple: smash the training dummy with a vertical, horizontal, and diagonal slash right in that order. And since he supposedly unlocked mana flow, he had to wrap it up by pulling off an actual aura strike. Gripping the hilt, Lucian mentally braced himself. This was his literal first time swinging a weapon in this body, and he urgently needed to calibrate to its pathetic limits. He vaguely remembered the original Lucian dabbling in some practical fencing, so he tightened his grip, locking in. He unleashed a savage overhead cleave, chained instantly into a horizontal sweep and a brutal diagonal slash, before finally channeling his mana. Boom! His eyes flared with a sick magical aura, and he obliterated the heavy-duty dummy into splinters. A massive dust cloud swallowed the courtyard. Lucian cringed. His form was super sloppy, since his mind was way faster than his new muscles. But hey, for a total scrub, not a bad start, right? Will that be enough for him? He wondered. Aizen just stared at the wreckage in dead silence. Finally, the master sighed. Honestly, this is exactly what I expected. Lucian cracked a proud grin, thinking he nailed it, but then to put it nicely, you're total trash. Lucian blinked, stunned. Wait, what's that supposed to mean? Aizen didn't hold back. Exactly what I just said. I have zero clue how you managed it, but your foundation is a dumpster fire of terrible habits. You completely bypass the fundamentals, swinging your weapon like a cornered rat, just trying to survive. It's pure mercenary street brawling, obsessed with brute force and speed, completely shattering the harmony between muscle and mana. Your slashes are incredibly dull and sloppy, more like chopping wood than actually cutting. And that final aura strike, it took you an embarrassing eternity to actually charge your blade. Lucian muttered that it barely took 1 or 2 seconds, but Aizen shut him down cold. That little bit you brush off so easily is everything. In a flash, the master pressed a razor-sharp edge right against Lucian's throat. It's more than enough time to slice your head clean off, he warned. Start respecting the clock, kid, because out there, a real enemy won't miss a beat. Lucian froze. He literally hadn't even felt the cold steel touch his skin. What an absolute joke. He would have been dead before his brain even registered the decapitation. Yet here he was acting all cocky. Aizen let out a dry smirk. Listen up, third young master. Being born with a god-tier physique doesn't make you invincible. You can't just muscle your way through an elite mana user. If your flesh tears under the sheer pressure of your own aura, you're dead meat. To unlock the blade's ultimate strike, your physical core and your raw magic gotta sync up perfectly. They might seem like polar opposites, but absolute power is born from that exact balance. Without warning, Aizen pivoted and violently obliterated the training dummy with a single flawless strike. This is your new path, he declared. Fast forward a few days, and our boy was still grinding through hellish sparring sessions. The old master constantly barked at him to keep his mana running, never letting it stall. You sculpt your muscles right. Now do the exact same with your energy, he yelled. Coating your body in aura means keeping the current flowing, dropping it exactly where and when it's needed. Lucian was sweating bullets, fighting desperately, but he was getting absolutely wrecked. Aizen didn't let up. When your mind, body, and magic finally click into a perfect equilibrium, only then will you taste real swordsmanship. With a massive shockwave, Lucian was blasted across the dirt, barely catching himself on his feet. Absolutely furious. Aizen just watched him with dead eyes. All right, playtime's over, he announced. Use what I just shoved into your brain and block this. But the difficulty had just spiked to insane levels. Lucian had to flawlessly read the old man's blistering speed and inject the exact millimeter-perfect amount of power into his parry. The master lunged, swinging his massive blade. In that split second, it finally clicked. The secret wasn't brute force, it was fluidity, moving like crashing waves. It was the ultimate hack to bridge their massive level gap, dealing critical damage without burning through his stamina. No more hesitating. Eyes locked onto the target, Lucian gritted his teeth, let out a furious battle cry, and unleashed a savage counterswing. Boom. The heavy steel collided and vibrant auras violently clashed. Aizen's toxic green energy grinding against Lucian's neon blue aura. Suddenly the master backed off, calling it a day. Burn this exact feeling into your muscles, Aizen ordered. That one sensation is your golden ticket to hitting first-class tier. Thank God it was over. Lucian instantly collapsed into the dirt, totally drained of life. Gasping for air, he managed to look up and choked out a weak, "Thanks for the lesson, master." Once the bloodbath of a session was completely wrapped, the terrified servants rushed in to sweep up the wrecked courtyard. The rumors were already spreading like wildfire among them. Is the young boss actually going to survive this? Meanwhile, our guy felt like absolute garbage, muttering that it was a miracle he didn't end up in a body bag today. His hands were vibrating uncontrollably. It was wild to think that this absolute torture was actually the only way, stripping away every single trash habit he dragged over from his past life. He had no choice but to eat the pain, because there was literally no shortcut. But the more he survived, the more he caught on to the genius of it. His respect for Aizen was skyrocketing. The old man deliberately engineered near-death scenarios, perfectly dialed to Lucian's exact stats, literally forcing his body to evolve and react perfectly through raw instinct. Honestly, that's insane. You can't just casually reprogram a swordsman's entire foundation without scanning their body like a supercomputer. Lucian had basically surrendered to the process, but damn, he could physically feel himself leveling up. Before this, he seriously thought climbing to the top was all about hoarding overpowered secret sword skills. He'd never even thought about micromanaging his wrist tension or energy pathways like this, even though the real cheat code had been hiding inside his own body all along. Man, if he had tapped into this absolute god-tier knowledge in his past life, his blade would have definitely sliced right through that lying scumbag who ordered him to die like a dog. A savage smirk crept onto his face. He remembered throwing himself at the master. The gaps between their hits were closing, and he caught himself wondering if he could actually tank a couple of heavy strikes now. Honestly, cutting the grind short today felt like a total waste. If only he had a punching bag to test this on. Just then, a crew walked into the yard. Lucian squinted. No way was it really him. The guy swaggered up, throwing out a cocky, "How's the body holding up?" It was Joshua, the fourth young master, strolling right up to Aizen and eyeing his new project. Aizen dipped his head. "Welcome." "Fourth young master, what brings you out here out of the blue? I'm kind of in the middle of forging your older brother into a weapon. So if you've got business, drop by later." But Joshua just waved it off. "No need for that, master." Aizen narrowed his eyes, already piecing together why this kid was really crashing the party. Before Aizen could even finish his thought, Joshua cut him off. "Yep, you guessed it. I heard my big bro finally dragged himself out of his cave and started swinging a sword again. I just had to see it." Playing the role of the younger yet vastly more experienced sibling, Joshua stepped up to the plate. Reaching out his hand, he pitched his idea. "Brother Lucian, let me assist you." Lucian internally grinned. His perfect punching bag had practically gift-wrapped himself. Aizen, raising an eyebrow, demanded to know what this sudden interruption was all about. Joshua smoothly claimed he just wanted to lend a hand with the third young master's daily grind. He pushed the envelope, asking if crossing blades wasn't the absolute best way to pressure test mana control out on the battlefield. Pitching himself as the ultimate sparring partner, Joshua laid on the guilt trip, pointing out how he barely had any time to actually bond. "If I let this chance slip, who knows when we'll get another," he claimed, brushing off his blatant disrespect as pure brotherly devotion. Our MC held back a smirk. Honestly, you had to hand it to the kids in this bloodline. They were masters at manipulating the narrative. Slapping the labels of training and bonding on this stunt didn't cover up the fact that he had just crashed the real kicker. He handed a live, razor-sharp steel blade to a guy who hadn't even clocked 7 days of basic sword drills. The kid's hidden agenda was so crystal clear, it was practically pathetic. He was out for blood, desperate to utterly humiliate Lucian, and since he cloaked the whole ambush as a favor from a caring sibling, nobody could officially call him out. Throwing a legendary holy swordsman into the mix as a witness only cranked up the stakes of this supposed practice match. It was wild. This brat was actively trying to back him into a corner, silently demanding he forfeit the succession race entirely. But if Lucian backed down now, he'd be painting a massive... Pivoting to his mentor, Lucian requested they greenlight the challenge. After all, wasn't little bro's sudden burst of passion totally inspiring? In reality, there was zero chance he was letting this massive disrespect slide. The kid's blind ego needed a serious reality check. He decided right then and there to personally school his spoiled little sibling. Across from him, Joshua's face twitched into a heavily forced, irritated. Our main character laid down the law, declaring that today marked the absolute end of putting up with these playground tantrums. They had dragged this farce out long enough in front of the master. Watching from the sidelines, Aizen easily decoded the fourth young master's talk, yet the veteran knight chose to let it ride. With a sharp nod, Aizen officially signed off on the brawl, stating that since they were both itching for a fight, he wouldn't stand in their way. He dropped a heavy warning, though. This was a one-and-done deal, and if things got remotely lethal, he was pulling the plug instantly. The two brothers chimed in, swearing they totally understood the ground rules. Then hitting peak older sibling energy, Lucian condescendingly patted the kid on the head, hyping up their upcoming clash, which Joshua bitterly accepted through gritted teeth. As they stepped onto the dirt of the arena, Aizen's voice boomed over them, reminding the boys this wasn't a death match, but purely an exam to gauge their progress. Given that our third young master was completely fresh to the battlefield, Aizen instructed Lucian to keep a defensive learning posture. Meanwhile, cross your blades with honor, he demanded, and do not drag the Valdec family crest through the mud. Once they locked into position, he gave the final command to unsheathe their steel and kick things off. The sharp ring of metal echoed as both blades caught the sunlight. Joshua shot daggers at Lucian. He was absolutely seething. Since when did this loser start acting so high and mighty, tossing around the word junior like a weapon? Just because Lucian popped into the world a few years earlier didn't give him the right to act this insufferable. Joshua tightened his grip, silently, vowing to beat the trash talk right out of his mouth. In this ruthless household, pure power absolutely trumped birthright, and he was about to brutally remind his older brother, who actually ran the yard. Catching that death glare, our MC just internally chuckled. The kid looked unhinged. You wouldn't even flash that kind of absolute venom at a final boss. Shifting the heavy steel into his dominant hand, Lucian relished the familiar, deadly weight. It had already been 2 solid months. Back in his past life, he would have spammed every dirty, underhanded trick in the book to secure the win. But today, he had to play the noble third young master. If he accidentally let a high-level assassin move, slip, his hawk-eyed mentor would definitely sniff out the anomaly. Sure, his opponent was slick and ruthless, but at the end of the day, Joshua was just an edgy kid who hadn't seen the real world. Since they were playing family, flashing an arrogant smirk, Joshua mocked him. Scanning for an exit already. What happened to all that big talk? Did it finally click that you're holding cold, hard steel? Relax, big bro. Don't shake too much. He smugly pointed out that lethal accidents only happen when 2 fighters are actually on the exact same level. But hey, if you're gonna wet yourself, I can fetch you a little wooden stick instead. Hearing this, Lucian flashed a dark grin, deciding to totally scratch what he just said about holding back. When a little brother gets this severely out of line, a brutal beatdown is the absolute best medicine. That might be the smartest move, Lucian countered smoothly. You know, if you want to walk out of here in one piece. Dropping the junior bomb one more time, he pushed the kid's rage meter completely into the red. Snapping entirely, Joshua lunged forward, screaming that he was going to make him choke on those words. Our MC casually braced himself, realizing that schooling this brat while nerfing his own stats was going to be the real challenge. This wasn't going to be a cakewalk. Joshua had also been soaking up techniques directly from the Sword Saint. The kid's footwork and fundamentals were dead serious. On top of that, our MC's mana tank was literally running on fumes after surviving that brutal sparring session with the mentor. Still, you can't fake actual combat experience. The dude was getting played like a fiddle by the cheapest trash talk imaginable. Channeling the Sword Saint's teachings, the MC locked in. He condensed his remaining mana, hyper-focusing the raw energy straight into his calves. He exploded off the ground like a bullet, closing the gap instantly to snatch the upper hand before Joshua could even blink. In a literal fraction of a second, his blade was hoisted high overhead. The Sword Saint and the bystanders completely froze, holding their breath in pure suspense, right as Lucian barked at his little bro to clench his jaw and brace for impact, or he'd literally bite his own tongue off. The blade came crashing down, unleashing an absolute shockwave. A massive dust cloud swallowed the training grounds. Joshua barely managed to block the heavy strike, his arms visibly shaking, while our MC coldly reminded him that real men absolutely do not fold under pressure. Looking down and realizing he had been forced onto one knee just to survive the heavy hit, Joshua's ego completely shattered. He furiously shoved the blade off, screaming at his older brother to just shut his mouth, before aggressively backstepping to create some breathing room. He spat that the hit was pure dumb luck, swearing on his life it wouldn't happen twice. He charged back in hot, swinging his blade with murderous intent, but Lucian effortlessly ghosted the attack with a simple backstep. Unhinged Joshua launched himself forward again, bringing his weapon crashing down. Lucian easily caught the strike, locking eyes with that arrogant, utterly childish glare before sweeping the heavy blade aside. The two immediately locked into a relentless, high-speed clash of steel. The panicked butler turned to the sword saint, practically begging him to step in. He stammered that the spar was getting way too out of hand and needed to be shut down immediately. He nervously pointed out that young Master Joshua harbored a massive grudge against Master Lucian, constantly hunting for excuses to bully him. Being so close in age, the two were endlessly weighed against each other, which basically poured gasoline on his toxic hatred. Whenever Lucian was involved, the kid went completely deaf to logic. If nobody hit the brakes right now, things were guaranteed to end in an absolute bloodbath. The sword saint calmly shot him down, guaranteeing that his worst nightmares wouldn't materialize. Sure, Joshua was, but he wasn't brainless enough to completely forget his aristocratic standing. Right now, the kid was basically just throwing a massive, armed temper tantrum. Honestly, you should be terrified for the exact opposite outcome, the master warned. The butler's jaw practically hit the floor, completely bewildered. Eisen kept his mouth shut, his piercing eyes glued to the chaos. He analyzed the clash mentally, noting that considering the absolute canyon between their current power levels, his own theory completely defied basic logic. Yes, the third young master was born with god-tier latent potential, but he severely lacked the real-world battlefield experience to actually flex it. Meanwhile, the fourth young master's innate talent was honestly mid at best, but his insane non-stop grind had pushed his combat stats way above average. Put simply, even if they completely threw away fancy sword arts and just straight up brawled, that brutal power gap couldn't be magically bridged by sheer luck. Yet the younger brother's total lack of emotional control was literally burning his own lead to the ground, all while the older sibling coldly stalked him for a fatal opening. To maintain that kind of icy composure while staring down a live blade, a true warrior has to completely conquer human terror. Seeing the third young master casually flex this kind of heavy aura meant he was either blissfully ignorant of danger due to being a total rookie, or he possessed the stone-cold vibe of a veteran who had stared the Grim Reaper in the eyes countless times. And chillingly enough, Eisen strongly suspected the latter was the terrifying truth. Sparks flew as the relentless exchange of steel raged on, with Joshua loudly taunting, demanding to know where all his brother's early swagger went. He mocked that Lucian should have just taken the easy way out when he showed him mercy earlier. He sneered that it honestly wasn't too late to drop the weapon and start begging. Our MC effortlessly deflected the wild slash, mentally noting that this kid was completely losing his marbles. But honestly, it made total sense. In his own twisted head, he was finally grinding his older sibling into the literal dirt. The massive impact of every single strike was sending violent tremors through his entire body. Originally, the MC's master plan was to shut this entire circus down with one single, knowing full well that absolutely no opponent is softer than a guy blinded by rage. But he made one massive miscalculation. Joshua was packing way more raw power than expected, and Lucian's remaining mana just wasn't enough to secure an instant knockout. Now his tank was so incredibly dry, he couldn't even cast a basic full-body reinforcement buff. With his back totally against the wall, he had to squeeze out every drop of tactical genius to wrap this whole thing up in a single high-stakes gambit. He parried another vicious swing. Joshua's eyes widened as the resistance on the blade suddenly felt way heavier. Was this guy seriously hiding a second wind? But watching Lucian practically hyperventilating, he instantly trashed that paranoid idea. Taking one good look at his exhausted state, there was zero chance he had any real juice left. This was clearly nothing but a desperate final flail. A wicked smirk crawled across his face as he lunged forward for the 100% positive. He was about to end the duel right here, right now. But a brutal counterattack was waiting for him. In reality, he had just walked directly into Lucian's trap. A heavy blade violently clattered onto the stone floor, and it definitely wasn't Lucian's. Pure shock washed over Joshua as he frantically processed what just happened. Did this guy seriously? If it were just a lucky dodge, his brain could accept it. But unless he was straight up hallucinating, his older brother was flashing a chilling, dead-eyed smirk. Had this entire desperate struggle been perfectly scripted from the very start? Lucian's ice-cold voice suddenly cut through the air, making him violently flinch. The MC mocked him, asking if he seriously dumped absolutely all his energy without zero backup plan for the follow-up. The kid completely missed that the heavy breathing was nothing but top-tier bait. And honestly, that right there is exactly why he'll always just be the little brother. And you call yourself the older brother? Joshua glared up at him, absolute fury in his eyes. He lunged forward, screaming that Lucian needed to actually win a fight before trying to preach. But our MC, he just effortlessly stomped down on Joshua's blade, pinning the kid flat against the floor. He leaned in, casually whispering that he was already planning on shutting him up. Flashing a wicked smirk, Joshua instantly lost all his tough guy energy. He stared up with wide, trembling puppy dog eyes, suddenly calling him his beloved brother. But Lucian just swung his blade down. Oh, now we're brothers. After that cold reality check, he handed down a seriously brutal lesson. Word of their little showdown spread through the estate like absolute wildfire. The maids and butlers couldn't stop gossiping about Lucian's massive win, completely roasting Joshua in the process. I mean, the kid marched in there acting like the main character, and crawled out looking like he just attended his own funeral. Someone even caught him sobbing. But let's be real. The only reason this tea was spilling so fast, and getting way more dramatic with every retelling, was all thanks to Hugo and Hans doing the PR work. Whenever the staff spotted those two, they instantly swarmed them, begging for every juicy detail of the fight. Everyone was dying to know if their young master had actually scored the Holy Swordsman's stamp of approval. Honestly, almost nobody realized this entire gossip mill was perfectly orchestrated by one guy. Lucian was practically glowing, vibing with the chaotic energy he just unleashed on the house. His bratty little sibling was actually super lucky he got off that easy. The exact second Joshua tried to play the family card, Lucian knew he had to break his ego. Joshua had shrieked in absolute terror, screaming that he messed up. Right as Lucian's blade crashed down, not slicing his neck, but completely shattering Joshua's sword right down the middle. He dropped a freezing warning. Pull a cheap stunt like that again, and things are gonna get super ugly. He told the kid to stay in his lane, learn his place, and start acting right, if he got the memo. He needed to nod. Joshua, trembling like a leaf, frantically shook his head in submission, snapping back to the present. Our MC figured those toxic half-brothers would finally lay low for a hot minute. He shifted his gaze to the sealed letter resting on his desk, realizing that since the messy family drama was basically handled, it was time to put House Logan on the chopping block. He tracked down his dad in the glass greenhouse, flashed the intercepted message, and asked if this was the secret intel Hugo managed to secure. Sigmund nodded. In exactly 7 days, those snakes were plotting a secret meetup with Logan's inner circle over in Vestra. Sigmund drummed his fingers against the table, his brow furrowed in disbelief. He called out how insanely bold the move was. Even if Vestra was basically a ghost town now, it was literally sitting right in Kelheim's backyard. Lucian totally agreed. The enemies clearly set up camp there, betting the Duke's radar wouldn't catch them. Sigmund admitted it was a total blind spot before locking eyes with his son, demanding to know. Sigmund pointed out that since he literally handed him the reins, he assumed Lucian was going to solo the mission. But our boy looked him dead in the eye and asked for backup. Just because a rat wanders right into a trap doesn't mean I've got the firepower to crush it. His dad raised an eyebrow. So you're coming to me to borrow my weapons. Sure, it's the logical play, but despite Lucian talking a big game about proving himself to Sigmund, it sounded like his kid just wanted an easy carry. Did he seriously think he could borrow the Duke's army, claim the victory, and actually get the family's respect? A true predator only builds his legend when he rips the throat out with his own bare hands. If he has to rely on his father's it's basically a fake flex. Sigmund had handed him the perfect stage and total freedom to pull the strings himself, yet he chose the safe route over the hardcore grind. Was playing it safe really his ultimate move? The Duke clenched his fist, his voice dropping as he demanded a real answer. Without missing a beat, Lucian coldly fired back that if this guarantees a flawless kill, he'd take the easy route every single time. Sigmund's frown deepened, but Lucian wasn't finished dropping bars. He declared that if doing things the honorable way is for kings, then only the insanely overpowered can survive it, while normal guys just end up as monster food. Acting like real courage means charging in blind with a spear isn't badass. It's just pure, unfiltered stupidity. Even if you somehow catch the win, it's brainless. Play like that and your squad loses all faith in you. For him, the true art of the hunt isn't about the kill count. It's about protecting the base. If the target gets permanently deleted, who actually cares what the history books say? But don't get it twisted. He's not just brushing this off to act like some flawless hero. It's all about who holds the power at the end of the day. Because when the inevitable time comes that the Duke is too weak to even pull his own bowstring, the survival of whoever inherits that weapon needs to be 100% guaranteed. His dad paused, letting that heavy reality sink in, and finally dropped He leaned back, admitting that answer actually hit the mark perfectly. Having someone clap back at him with that level of ice-cold logic, he genuinely couldn't remember the last time someone had the guts to do it. He never saw that raw ambition coming from his son. It was exactly what he wanted to hear. Lucian felt a quiet rush of pride at the Duke's approval, firmly stating that a real boss never second-guesses the empire he's building. If a single word makes you fold, you ain't achieving squat. Lucian stared him down, asking if this whole thing was just some twisted test. Sigmund didn't hesitate to confirm it. The Patriarch wanted to see if Lucian would crumble under heavy pressure. If a guy is paralyzed by doubt, completely unable to figure things out for himself, why would anyone blindly follow a leader who ghosts his own morals? What kind of boss is that? He wouldn't even deserve to be called a man. Lucian smirked internally. He totally saw this coming. Deep down he knew this mission was way above his pay grade. Still, his old man's brutal standards were next-level intense. Seriously, nothing in this life comes free. But since they were actually vibing, Lucian pivoted back to his original hustle and straight up asked for backup. Sigmund coldly promised to hand over the right gear for the job. After all, considering the stakes, rolling in with a massive army would totally blow their cover. They needed to move as a hyper-lethal, bite-sized ghost squad to stay off the radar. Lucian nodded along, scratching his head with a nervous chuckle, and begged to borrow a handful of top-tier knights. Sigmund cut him off cold. "I'm giving you the Black Lions. Let the kid try surviving the heavy hitters of this territory." Boom, 1 week later. Lucian and Hugo finally rolled up to the drop zone. Lucian scanned the horizon. This ghost town was an absolute dump, way more wrecked than the rumors let on. Not a single soul in sight. Hugo chimed in, explaining that even though they were chilling right next to Kelheim, the place was completely stripped of loot. It died out as a trade hub years ago, leaving only sketchy drifters roaming the alleys. That made it the ultimate hideout for their ambush. But seriously, was Lucian ever going to spill how he basically read the enemy's mind? Even Hans was totally clueless. Lucian just flashed a sly grin, promising to drop the lore later. Right now it was hunting season. Was the bait ready? Hugo gave a firm nod. The inside of that abandoned factory was rigged to perfectly mirror their bogus intel. Did they stash the secret weapon? Yup. Now they just had to chill until the cavalry arrived to bag their target. But seeing Hugo aggressively staring at his boots, Lucian asked if bringing his dad's goons into this bruised his ego. Hugo practically jumped frantically, denying it. This wasn't some game. The muscle-bound knight knew damn well they had zero margin for error here. He was just super salty about being dead weight. If he had the brain power to crack this case solo, he'd be taking all the glory. Lucian clamped a hand on the giant's shoulder, throwing him a sympathetic look. He totally got the frustration, but they were barely at level 1 of this grind. Rushing things would only get them cooked. Plus, come on, the guy was only 30. He had his whole life left to level up. Hugo deadpanned. He was 23, nowhere near 30, meaning their age gap was barely a thing. Lucian's jaw practically hit the dirt. A painfully awkward silence choked the air until Lucian finally cleared his throat, muttering that he'd literally just hit 20. Hugo flashed a tragically sad smile and begged him to stop talking. The cringe was already lethal. Black crows swarmed the sickly sky overhead. Lucian scanned the shadows, realizing that ready or not, the clock was ticking down. But seriously, where the hell was their backup? Out of nowhere, an icy voice slithered right behind their necks, sending shivers down their spines. Hugo whipped around, ripping his blade from its sheath for a killer strike. But the stranger effortlessly halted him, mocking him for being painfully slow. "You call yourself a warrior?" Hugo's eyes went wide with pure shock. The dude had casually caught his heavy strike with just one bare, and Hugo was completely paralyzed. Nobody had ever outmuscled him in his entire life, yet right now he felt like an absolute infant. Lucian quickly ordered him to stand down. This guy wasn't the enemy, even though his bloodlust was practically screaming murder. With a stone-cold glare, he barked at the Black Lion, demanding to know what kind of sick game he was playing. Hugo instantly leaped back to create some breathing room, sliding right next to his boss. He nervously whispered, asking if these were actually the legendary bogeymen from the terrifying rumors. The Black Lions, the ultimate Black Ops death squad, handling all the Valdec family's bloodiest secrets, answering only to the big boss himself. Lucian nodded grimly. Yep, these were the apex predators sent to babysit them. The squad's ruthless commander, Raymond, threw a mock salute, claiming they were just testing the bodyguard's reflexes. Just a friendly little vibe check. Zero hard feelings. Lucian mentally hit pause. In his previous life, he wasn't even sure these guys were real. Turns out, every single nightmare about them was 100% factual. He'd been on high alert, yet he hadn't sensed a damn thing. Even now, with this killing machine standing inches from his face, the guy's aura was completely erased. It was like staring into a black hole, totally unreadable. Every single one of them was a literal monster. Lucian cracked a faint smile, silently thanking his old man for sending some ridiculously overpowered backup. Stepping out of the open, they huddled up for the briefing. Lucian locked eyes with the Shadow Squad, assuming they had already memorized the playbook. The Logan family swallowed the bait and were marching straight into the kill zone. The objective was dead simple: snatch their boss breathing. Everyone else, fair game to be slaughtered. Those rats crossed a major line, so no holding back. Other than that, the assassins had full clearance to go wild. Raymond studied the kid. Honestly, at first he thought the Archduke just sent them to do a favor for his spoiled third son. But get this, staying completely unfazed during a random ambush wasn't the only flex this young master had up his sleeve. Homeboy was sharp, calculating their muscle on the... You could feel the tension spiking. He slammed his fist against his chest, signaling that he understood the assignment, and the rest of his squad. As the sun dipped below the skyline, the flashy carriage of House Logan finally rolled into town. Stepping out, the young master scrunched his face in pure disgust, complaining loudly about the absolute nightmare of a trip. Honestly, if his old man hadn't forced his hand, there was zero chance he'd ever step foot in this backwater dump. A maid quickly handed over a crisp handkerchief, plotting to speedrun this miserable errand and dip back to his luxurious mansion, ASAP. Just inhaling the local oxygen made him sick. Meet Philip Logan, the outrageously entitled fourth son of the Logan Empire. Out of nowhere, a local dude sprinted up, totally hyping up the arrival and groveling about missing the VIP memo. Instantly, Philip's knight flashed his blade right at the guy's throat, barking that one wrong flinch would literally be his last. The guy froze, trembling like a leaf, as the ruthless guard demanded he drop his name right then and there. Bowing so low he practically kissed the dirt, the guy pleaded for mercy, claiming boss Hugo just sent him to play tour guide. He played the role of a pathetic, worthless peasant to perfection, because under that dirty act was Lucian internally smirking that his trap was perfectly set. Philip scoffed, telling his bodyguard to sheathe the steel. Wasting breath on trash like this was way below his pay grade. As they strutted inside the building, our boy Lucian threw a fake prayer to the heavens, low-key buzzing that he had snagged. Every sigh and side-eye from Philip practically bled old money arrogance, and this haughty kid definitely had to be a marquis's son. His escort was light only around 12 guys, exactly as he predicted. Most likely they were just elite trainees from the Logan Academy. But that shadow of a bodyguard glued to the kid's side, major red flag. If there was anything else completely off script here, it was the fact that he dragged maids along to a sketchy meetup. Philip snapped at Lucian, calling him a brain-dead moron, and barking at him to stop staring and start walking. Lucian scurried forward, faking a massive panic attack, stammering that he was just starstruck by someone so ridiculously high class. Scoffing at the peasant's lack of manners, Philip called him a pathetic idiot. Right then, Lucian caught a glimpse of one of the maids and totally double-taked. Why did she look so crazy familiar? A wild theory flashed in his brain, but he instantly tossed it out. There was no way. It was literally impossible. She just happened to look exactly like him. Shaking it off, our main character guided the snob into the shady tavern. Sweeping his gaze over the filthy room, Philip gagged, complaining the inside smelled even worse than the rotting streets outside. He grumbled, wondering if that idiot Hugo actually scammed his family's funds. Right on cue, Hugo slid out from the dark corners, smoothly claiming the rundown exterior was just a cover-up. Because you know it's what's on the inside. Philip scowled, demanding to know who the hell this random guy was. The man just bowed slightly, introducing himself as Hugo, the steward. He casually explained that dealing with such top-tier fragile merch took a little extra prep time. Philip crossed his arms, smirking that showing his face personally meant he wasn't dumb enough to try and pull a fast one. Chuckling, Hugo shot back, like he would ever be crazy enough to poke the Logan family bear over some pocket change. After flooding them with all those boring, endless reports, and the fact they had to be dying to see the exact weapon guaranteed to make Kelheim rot and crumble into absolute dust, he promised to drop the big reveal right then and there. Watching this, Lucian secretly smiled, totally vibing with Hugo's insane poker face. The guy was dropping pure lies without breaking a single sweat. Philip scoffed, calling him an arrogant mutt, throwing down a harsh warning that if this prize was a flop, it would be lights out for him. He then barked at the peasant, ordering him to grab the package from his boss. Playing the eager fanboy, our MC practically skipped over to Hugo to fetch the hyped-up item. Hugo handed it over, and the two exchanged a split-second knowing nod. Lucian gripped the glass vial tight and suddenly chucked it into the air with insane force, shouting that it was finally time for the special delivery. Philip lost his mind, screaming at the top of his lungs, demanding what the hell this absolute psycho was thinking. Bam! A throwing knife sniped the vial mid-air. The glass shattered and raw, blazing magic started leaking out like crazy. The lead bodyguard desperately yanked Philip behind him, just a split second before the unstable magic inside straight up detonated. Lucian and Hugo instantly ducked, shielding their eyes as an apocalyptic flash nuked the entire tavern, completely wiping out everyone's vision in a Philip dropped to his knees, utterly terrified, and shielded his head with trembling hands. Screaming for backup, he got nothing but dead silence in return. Panic took over as he started spitting curses and tossing empty threats into the void. Seriously, where the hell was everybody? Suddenly, a familiar voice rasped his name, and his eyes snapped open, practically gleaming with desperate hope. He shrieked back, begging his loyal knight to save him. But thanks to that blinding flashbang, his vision was totally shot, a dizzying, blurry mess. Vague, hazy silhouettes danced around him. But as the room slowly swam back into focus, the sheer horror of reality hit him. His top guy was violently gripping a massive gash on his neck, choking out a desperate warning. Run! It was a setup. The knight crumpled to the cold stone floor, lifeless. Philip just stared, absolutely paralyzed by terror. Scanning the blood-soaked room, the nightmare deepened. Every single guard had been slaughtered. And standing right there was Nixon, the infamous black. Nixon brutally executed the final survivor, without breaking a sweat, sending the terrified maids fleeing in pure hysteria. Philip couldn't hold. Watching the chaos unfold, our main character connected the dots. That magic stone packed one hell of a blinding detonation on impact. Sure, those artifacts cost a massive fortune, and are incredibly volatile, meaning nobody ever drops them casually. But for flash blinding an entire room, absolute perfection. Still wiping out the Marquis' elite squad in the blink of an eye. Insane. The commanding officer casually strolled up to the main character, giving a clean report that every single hostile target had been completely neutralized. They would safely evacuate the civilians, but he pointed out that the sniveling noble seemed to be the guy running the show. Lucian swallowed a heavy lump of anxiety as his old man's heavy warnings echoed in his head, finally grasping the crushing weight of real leadership. Meanwhile, Philip was still absolutely losing it, screeching at the squad to back off. Did these lowlifes have any idea who they were messing with? He was a high-blooded noble, the fourth son of the Logran dynasty. His pathetic voice shook violently. The Black Lion just smirked coldly, declaring that his grace, Archduke Valdek himself, would be the one playing judge, jury, and executioner. He strongly suggested the brat surrender without making a fuss. Philip furiously ground his teeth together. Was that filthy peasant actually a hidden royal from the Valdek bloodline? If that was true, getting dragged away as a hostage was literally a death sentence. He whipped around, viciously barking at the trembling maids, asking what the hell they were just standing around for. Then, he desperately yelled for the out, but again, absolute silence. He choked out, "Are you guys all dead out there too?" The main character honestly thought this miserable fight was totally wrapped up, but then Philip shrieked Felicia's name, and the coward's eyes suddenly flashed with arrogant authority. He grandly announced that he was finally giving her permission to draw her weapon, and ordered her to sweep the trash. Felicia calmly nudged the terrified maids out of her way, stalking over to a fallen blade. With a slick flick of her foot, she launched the heavy steel into the air and caught it flawlessly. Lucian's jaw practically dropped. The identical face, her entire vibe instantly shifted to something terrifyingly lethal the second she gripped the hilt. The legendary sword demon Felix. Was that actually her? Seeing her arm up, Philip instantly threw himself at her boots and pathetically clutched the fabric of her skirt, sobbing and begging her to carve an escape route. He would give her anything, absolutely anything she ever wanted. He swore on his life that nobody would ever trash-talk her mother's peasant bloodline again. But Felicia just stood there, icy and completely silent, and he groveled harder, pleading with her to say literally anything. Wasn't her entire pathetic existence just to be his meat shield? Without breaking eye contact with the enemy, leveling the jagged blade straight at the strike force, she muttered that she was incredibly sick of dealing with his endless nonsense. Nixon scoffed, clearly amused by the wild twist. Wow. The so-called noble was actually cowering behind a girl, completely abandoning his last pathetic shred of dignity. The Black Lion shifted his dead, telling her he totally respected the killer instinct in her eyes, but advised her not to throw her life away on a suicide run just to flex some useless bravado. Letting her walk away was his one and only act of mercy. She didn't flinch, and her dead silence told him everything he needed to know. In a single explosive dash, he closed the gap instantly, thrusting the razor-sharp tip of his broadsword right at her skull. A fraction of an inch closer, and it would have gutted her right through the eye. But to her, the world slammed into ultra-slow motion. She tracked every micro-shift of his muscles, every single breath. Exploiting that crazy perception, she parried the lethal strike, violently deflecting his massive blade skyward with lightning-fast. Pivoting her entire stance, she launched herself into a vicious counterattack. The final thing Nixon caught was his own shocked reflection, glaring back from her steel. He literally had zero time to react. Her speed was absolutely insane, leaving the main character in pure disbelief. Her reflexes were so ridiculous, they practically bordered on precognition. Those wildly erratic flowing slashes, there wasn't a shadow of a doubt left. This girl was the legendary demon Felix. Looking back, Felix's impossibly graceful, elegant manners had always stuck out like a sore thumb in the gritty, bloody underworld of mercenaries. He was always known for his super slender frame and bizarrely delicate face. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces locked perfectly into place. The bastard daughter, Felicia, had totally ghosted her toxic family, cross-dressing and dominating the underworld under the alias Felix. The Black Lion stepped back slowly, smearing a streak of fresh blood off his cheek, and grimly admitted that if his block had been even a millisecond slower, his severed head would currently be rolling around on the bloody carpet. He genuinely had a hell of a lot more to learn. He completely misjudged her threat level, totally blind to the deadly fangs she was hiding. Swallowing his massive ego, he officially declared he would now treat her as a true equal-tier opponent. With that vow, he unleashed a suffocating shockwave of killing intent, and cold sweat beaded down Felicia's neck. She instantly recognized that this absolute monster was leagues above her. Taking him down right now, not happening. And banking on dumb luck wasn't going to cut it anymore. Plus, there was another top-tier swordsman lurking on the second floor, not to mention a monster who outclassed them all. Her survival rate was basically zero. But if this was going to be her final stand, she was going out swinging. No regrets. Black Lion was shook. It was honestly insane how she didn't flinch for a second, even with the odds completely stacked against her. And on top of that, she stared straight. Raymond, however, caught a tiny detail. Crimson drops were trickling right out of Nixon's fresh wound. Both fighters locked in. They exploded forward, closing the distance in a flash. Their eyes and steel were a split second from colliding, until Lucian's voice ripped through the air, barking at them to freeze. The sudden shout threw them completely off balance. Nixon instantly leaped back. Our MC stepped up his tone absolute. That's enough. He wasn't going to let another drop of blood spill today. Nixon was beyond frustrated. After all, the boss was the one. If we let her walk away alive, she's going to become a massive headache for House Valdek. Lucian's eyes narrowed. Did you forget who handed you that authority? He completely understood the knight's concerns. Sure, but if this dragged on, a body bag was guaranteed. He strolled right up to Felicia, formally introducing himself. Since he was pulling the strings on this operation, he wanted to toss her a lifeline. They'd settle this whole mess with a simple, one-on-one duel. If he caught an L, she gets to walk away without a scratch. But if she took the loss, she'd have to drop. A wildly confident smirk crept across his face. She stared back, totally blindsided that he'd actually offer her an out like this. Suddenly, Philip screeched from the sidelines. "What the hell are you waiting for? Take the damn deal." The only thing this coward cared about was saving his own skin. Didn't she feel an ounce of guilt for his poor brother, who was forced to suffer through this nightmare just because her squad was a bunch of incompetent losers? Prove to me that you're actually useful, unlike the rest of them. Prove that you're not trash like your mother. Felicia's knuckles turned white as she gripped her hilt, swallowing her rage without saying a word. "Shut your mouth," our MC snapped. Those fallen knights weren't just some punchline for a piece of garbage like him to disrespect. Keep insulting the people who bled to protect you, or disrespect Felicia one more time, and I'll personally rip your tongue right out of your skull. He turned his piercing gaze to the entire room, announcing loudly that he was taking 100% responsibility for however this played out, even if by some crazy fluke he tasted defeat. With that settled, he locked eyes with Felicia. He stated that he, the third son of House Valdek, was putting his entire family name on the line to challenge her. "Draw your blade. Do it for yourself." Off to the side, Nixon pulled the commander aside. "Are we seriously just going to stand here and watch this?" Even though Nixon was holding back earlier, since he was only trying to knock her out, she didn't just parry his heavy strikes. She actually managed to draw his blood. But just looking at her sloppy footwork and raw mana control, it was painfully obvious she had zero formal training, which made the whole thing absolutely insane. Her raw talent and beast-like instincts were completely off the charts. With how crazy her skills are right now, the third young master is going to get completely washed. Sure, the kid had serious guts and killer tactical judgment, but actual combat prowess, that was a whole different ballgame. They needed to step in. Raymond nodded, totally agreeing with the assessment. But this time, he wanted to just kick back and watch the show. The exact second the young master grabbed his hilt for this fight, he realized exactly what they were dealing with. He had felt it when their blades crossed earlier. This girl possessed a terrifying, mysterious talent and incredibly sharp eyes. But the third young master, he sees the entire board perfectly. He knows exactly what his own limits are. "Let's just sit tight," Raymond smirked. "I want to see exactly what he's scheming here." Across the room, Felicia was spiraling. Lucian Valdek wasn't acting like any stuck-up noble she'd ever met. It wasn't just the crazy fact that he disguised himself as a lowly servant just to infiltrate and scout out Logan's inner circle. Now he was throwing himself into a totally unnecessary death match. She couldn't even begin to decode his true motives, but she was dead sure about one thing. In a straight fight, he stood zero chance. Biting her lip, she swore she'd never forget his incredible mercy, since he was actually giving a mere servant like her a fighting chance. "If I take you down, I'll swallow my pride and vanish from this place." He shot back that if he won, she was packing her bags for Kelheim. The fierce look in her eyes proved she was fully locked in. She aimed her steel straight at his chest, and he mirrored her stance. She genuinely didn't want to butcher the guy who just saved her, so she plotted to knock him out cold with a single, lightning-fast strike. In a heartbeat, her aura shifted entirely, and she launched herself like a human missile. She vaulted into the air, bringing her blade crashing down. She was absolute certain this was checkmate, until her eyes blew wide open in sheer shock. He deflected her strike with a deafening clang. In a flash, he counterattacked, forcing her to scramble backward to survive. She was absolutely convinced the young master's stamina and reflexes were way too sluggish to ever match her lightning-fast speed. So how on earth did he just parry her blade? Before she even blinked, he blurred right into her face, forcing her into a desperate, panicked block. Our MC ruthlessly pushed the offensive, realizing her mind was probably short-circuiting from being backed into such a lethal corner. Her energy was completely drained from desperately managing her mana against the Black Lion. Even if she had held some power in reserve, the massive power gap between them right now was just impossible to bridge. The catch. He literally reads her better than she knows herself. Her tiny quirks, her blind spots, and the exact deadly path of her blade. He practically has it all. Their past clash might have been short-lived, but they had traded some seriously brutal blows, deeply engraving their techniques into each other's muscle memory. If there was a single opponent his body could never forget, it was her. Right at that split second, a shattered piece of steel launched high into the air, leaving the crowd completely gasping in awe, and Philip absolutely terrified. Sure, the time the two had spent side by side was just a brief flicker in the past, but despite that she had poured her soul into teaching him the blade, fully aware that destiny might one day force them to cross swords. Those brutal lessons were the exact reason he survived. And now, clang! Her shattered weapon hit the dirt. Felicia gasped for air, staring up at him with wide, completely shell-shocked eyes. He figured this overwhelming defeat would at least serve as a tiny down payment for the heavy debt he still owed her from back then. By nightfall, the battered squad finally made it back to the estate. Up on the grand balcony, Sigmund stood like a king, quietly looking over his mask. He turned to Raymond, demanding the debrief. He wanted to know if that kid Lucian actually possessed the raw grit to become an unstoppable pillar for the mighty Valdec bloodline. Raymond didn't hesitate, declaring that the boy had an absolutely unbreakable core. The Archduke chuckled, admitting he would have breathed a huge sigh of relief, just to hear the kid hadn't completely messed up and strayed from the path. Instead, the report he got was totally mind-blowing. Raymond stepped closer, asking if his hunch was spot on all along. Sigmund smirked, hinting that sending the boy into that meat grinder was a highly calculated move. But he warned it was way too early to start crowning the next heir to the throne. Taking the hint, Raymond quickly bowed his head, apologizing for overstepping. The Archduke brushed it off. He admitted that if the insane details in that battle report weren't exaggerated, the kid's performance was absolute. Glancing down at a mystery package in his grip, a rare smile broke across his face. He clapped Raymond on the shoulder, joking that he could at least act the part of a proud father for a night. Besides, it had been way too long since they shared a glass. Someone had just delivered an incredibly rare vintage. He invited Raymond to drink up, noting it was his absolute favorite blend, so he was bound to love it. Raymond just laughed, warning the Archduke that he was definitely going to regret pouring those drinks so early, because honestly spilling, the sheer insanity of this mission would take way longer than a single night. Fast forward past the brutal Vestra operation, and our MC hit the road for Kelheim at the crack of dawn. You see, the second their epic clash wrapped up, Felicia practically blacked out, completely burnt out from frying her mana circuits. Making sure she didn't just drop dead, he shipped her and the terrified maids off to the nearest clinic to recover. As for that absolute scumbag who played the arrogant noble until the bitter end MC ruthlessly forced him to dig his own vassals' graves with his bare hands. He wanted that entitled jerk to literally feel the crushing weight of the blood on his hands. Meanwhile, MC just kicked back, soaking in the warm sun and the peaceful breeze, a peace that was violently shattered by Philip. The guy was screaming his lungs out at Hugo, swearing absolute bloody revenge. Did he seriously think he could just backstab them and walk away breathing? Then Philip snapped his venomous glare toward Lucian, barking that he demanded full VIP treatment as a high-ranking prisoner of war. How dare they treat the golden heir of House Logren like absolute street trash? Was he seriously insane enough to wage total war against his family? MC just shot him a completely disgusted, dead-eyed glare, realizing this spoiled brat still hadn't grasped how unbelievably screwed he actually was. Walking up to him, our MC coldly offered him one single chilling piece of advice. If he wanted to keep breathing for another 5 minutes, he needed to shut his damn mouth. Right now. Because they were entering a territory where even his untouchable father wouldn't dare step foot without shaking in his boots. This was Kelheim, the absolute beating heart of the Valdec Empire. And as their carriage finally rolled into the massive iron gates swung open, revealing a totally mind-blowing scene. The streets were literally packed with citizens. They were screaming his name, cheering him as a total legend for dragging House Legrand's filthy secrets into the light, and for dragging their corrupt boss back in chains. It was a massive, joyful parade, utterly lost. Hugo blinked and stammered. What the hell is actually going on right now? Lucian just gave a low, smug chuckle. He admitted he had secretly pulled some strings, sending a quiet letter requesting the chance to publicly ruin the Legrand family's reputation. But honestly, it looked like his old man had decided to flex his power and back him up to the absolute max. He nudged Hugo, telling him to chin up and soak in the glory. After all, this was his very first massive win. As they rode through a storm of confetti and screaming fans, Sigmund watched proudly from a towering balcony. The Archduke muttered with a smirk that he must be getting soft in his old age, tossing together a literal victory parade, simply because his kid asked for a favor. Edwin chuckled warmly beside him, pointing out that the boy had just pulled off an absolutely insane feat, and he did it without a single scratch. This wild hype was 100% earned, and more importantly, the young master was officially on the map. Lucian's open letter wasn't just some basic flex to boost his own clout. It was a fiercely calculated power play, designed to flash the Valdec family's ironclad resolve to the public, while dropping a massive warning sign right on the imperial family's doorstep, and House Legrand. The Duke definitely saw this playing out, which is exactly why he greenlit the stunt. Sigmund pointed out that the whole empire had been completely on edge lately. Even a sun that feels eternal, or lion claws that look totally bulletproof, will eventually snap under pressure. To dodge getting wiped out by the coming storm, they needed to grind their blades sharper than ever before. The second he crashed back at the estate, our guy face-planted into his mattress, letting out this massive sigh. He finally felt alive. It was wild how much he missed this chaotic vibe, especially after getting so used to that high-class noble lifestyle. Since the Duke had bumped his official debrief to the evening, he actually had a minute to breathe. Honestly, the whole operation paid off way harder than he ever guessed. He snatched up Felicia way ahead of schedule, pulled off an epic victory parade that completely torched his trash reputation in one single swoop, handed Hugo the ultimate fuel to keep grinding, and even locked in a solid connection with the Black Lion. All these totally random puzzle pieces were finally snapping together, paving a clear runway. A runway that was inching him dangerously close to the dragon's throne. A smirk crept across his face, as his old mercenary squad flashed through his mind. If those dudes caught a glimpse of him now, they'd absolutely lose their minds. But he snapped himself out of the daydream, realizing it was time to prep the next move. While Felicia bounced back from their brutal clash, and while Hugo sweated out in training, he figured he'd go see exactly how much leverage he could milk out of the Duke. He strolled into the dining hall, where Sigmund was already chilling waiting for him. They dug into the feast with the Duke dropping that his debut mission was an absolute masterclass. They cross-checked the intel, and confirmed the hostage kid was without a doubt the Marquis's golden boy. This was the ultimate, undeniable flex, proving he completely aced the job. Lucian soaked it in, smoothly giving all the credit to his old man for tossing the Black Lion squad his way. But hey, what's the endgame for Philip Legrand now? There's zero chance the Marquis just sits back and watches his own flesh and blood get iced. The Archduke just coldly stated that time would tell. Bernhard Legrand is an absolute snake. That dude wouldn't blink twice about throwing his own kid under the bus, just to keep his empire intact. As long as he's got one heir, the bloodline survives. Hearing that ice-cold logic made Lucian physically tense up, but his dad just brushed it off, telling him to chill out. He'd already knocked it out of the park. Now it was time to name his price for the operation. The Duke knew that flashy letter wasn't just for show. He highly doubted his son was going to just settle for a basic hero's welcome. Lucian let out this awkward, nervous chuckle, avoiding eye contact. He mumbled that getting called out so directly actually made him sweat a little. But, since they were already spilling the tea, he might as well shoot his shot. He figured he'd lead with Hugo, since the guy totally carried his weight this time around. But before he could even get the whole pitch out, his dad instantly shut it down. Hard pass. Lucian blinked, totally thrown off. Wait, he hadn't even finished the sentence. Sigmund just stared right through him. You were going to demand a knighthood for him, weren't you? Sure, Hugo was a massive asset on this run, but his messy history with the Marquis's camp was a giant red flag. If Lucian hadn't poached him, Hugo would have ridden with the enemy until the wheels fell off. Lucian desperately tried to flip the script, pushing back that was purely hypothetical. The bottom line was, Hugo bled for their side and delivered a flawless performance. But his old man just shot him this absolutely freezing glare, ordering him to drop it. A true knight has to forge his own glory, by pulling off legendary feats that absolutely nobody can question. Did he seriously think that guy had the sauce? Lucian's gaze dropped, instantly defeated. He totally saw that rejection coming, but man, that sounded like a hard, permanent no. His dad coldly added that if he just wanted to flex some wealth, he'd literally toss him overflowing treasure chests. He'd even buy the guy a brand new identity if needed. But a knighthood? Not happening. At least not today. Lucian sent out a silent mental apology to Hugo. They were just gonna have to grind for another opening. Swallowing his pride, he backed off. Admitting his dad made a fair point, he got way too ahead of himself. Sigmund, unbothered, told him to just pitch something else. Something a little less insane this time. A sly grin flashed across Lucian's face. All right then. He just had one super low-key favor to ask. Give Felicia an audience with the Holy Swordsman. That massive curveball left his dad completely speechless. Fast forward a bit. Deep inside a detention compound, Felicia was chilling in her quarters, mind racing. This definitely wasn't your average dungeon. It was a high-end VIP lockup for disgraced royals. They tossed her in here with her own maid, eating gourmet meals and getting actual medical care. What kind of sick game were they playing? But then, flashbacks of the pure trash she used to endure hit her. Honestly, maybe this was a massive upgrade. She finally dragged herself out of her old living hell. Her mind drifted back to that brutal clash with Lucian, and that desperate burning craving to wield a blade of her own. Just one last clash before she kicked the bucket. If she could be greedy, she'd kill for one final duel against him. But let's be real, that was a total pipe dream. Lucian strolled into her room, dropping the hard truth the healer said her mana flow was completely wrecked. She was running on absolute fumes. He checked in, was she bouncing back? Could she even grip a hilt right now? His sudden entrance totally caught her off guard, but the word sword instantly hooked her attention. He raised an eyebrow, challenging her. Was she seriously planning to rot in this room forever? Crazy enough, she actually seemed to vibe with the locked-up life. He casually swiped some bread off a tray and took a massive bite. He flat out told her he didn't bust his back dragging her out here just for her to chill. He was cutting straight to the chase. Was she really gonna hide her insane combat skills? He wasn't about to let her stay some mid-tier fighter. He offered to back her as an apprentice to the legendary Eisen. She clenched her jaw, hissing. Was this some kind of sick joke to him? She snapped back, shouting that a lowly maid like her, even picking up a blade, was already pushing it, let alone training under a literal holy swordsman. She might be dirt poor, but she wasn't delusional enough to forget her place. Lucian mentally hit the brakes. Okay, he totally rushed things. Her freaking out made perfect sense. Even as the Marquis's secret kid, she was strictly forbidden from even touching a weapon. Never mind learning to actually fight. Instead, she just tanked non-stop abuse and toxic jealousy from her half-siblings. That nightmare forged the sword demon Felix, who eventually broke free from the Logan family. He softened his tone, saying he totally got why she had major trust issues telling her to sleep on it. Totally lost, she asked what the heck he meant. He smirked, telling her he was handing over the steering wheel. It was her call now. With that, he turned toward the door. Pausing at the frame, he dropped one last truth. Do not ditch the blade. She only becomes her true badass self when she's gripping cold steel. Those words completely shattered her defenses. Even her own bloodline had viciously ripped that dream away from her. Heart pounding, she leaped out of bed and screamed after him, desperately asking if she actually deserved a shot like this. Could she really just ghost everything else and go all in on the path of the sword? He looked back and swore on his very name. If that's what her soul craved, he'd make damn sure it happened. Back in his gritty mercenary days, he once asked Felix about his ultimate goal. While everyone else chased clout and cash, Felix was just built differently. Getting knighted would have been a total breeze for him. Knight Captain, a flashy, noble title. But Felix had just shrugged, admitting he never really cared about the hype. If he had just one wish, he'd ditch the background noise and dedicate his entire existence to the blade. That alone would be absolute peak living for him. Cutting to the present, Lucian escorted her down to the training yard, only to spot his own father waiting. He strolled up totally puzzled, asking what dragged the Archduke all the way out here. His dad smirked, saying there was no way he'd skip a face-to-face with the... Did Lucian seriously think he'd ghost such a massive milestone? The Archduke then shifted his heavy gaze to Lucian's crew. They instantly dropped into deep, respectful bows. Sigmund zeroed in, asking if this was the infamous Hugo. Hugo nervously glanced up, practically sweating bullets. The Archduke casually noted that word on the street was Hugo actually clutched up this time around. But honestly, his past screw-ups were way too massive to just wipe clean over one lucky win. Hugo instantly ducked his head. He choked out that there were absolute zero excuses for the garbage he pulled. Sigmund coolly replied that even knowing his toxic history, his young lord still practically begged to get Hugo knighted. And get this, Lucian literally tossed away his own massive reward to make it happen. Lucian started panicking, awkwardly interrupting to ask what his dad was yapping about. Hugo's jaw practically hit the floor. He was actually backing up his big talk. The Archduke sighed, admitting he hated to rain on Lucian's parade, but he totally vetoed the idea. He straight up believed Hugo wasn't mentally built to carry that kind of heavy title just yet. So the mission was simple. Keep grinding and prove that blind loyalty through hardcore actions, not empty words. Until the day the Archduke himself could hand over that shiny knighthood. He smirked, saying he'd eagerly wait to see that epic glow-up. Fire blazing in his eyes, Hugo confidently barked back that he would absolutely. With that handled, Sigmund locked eyes with Felicia. He stated coldly that growing up in that brutal household, she had to know exactly how the brutal real world worked. The whole succession war was still totally up in the air, and Lucian was betting the whole damn house just to shield a random maid. If she completely flopped, the noble vultures would tear him apart, branding him a pathetic simp blinded by a pretty face. So she needed to drop the act and answer him right now. Was she honestly worth risking everything? Completely paralyzed, she just mumbled, totally frozen and speechless. Lucian flashed a confident smirk, stepping right up to defend her. He looked his old man dead in the eye, swearing she was a massive gamble, totally worth taking. The payoff. It was going to be insane. Sure, the haters could call him crazy right now. Honestly, even Felicia looked like she was second-guessing her own shadow. But all that noise, it dies today. Pretty soon, the whole world would realize she was an absolute diamond in the rough, only held back by stupid rules about her bloodline and gender. He leaned in, whispering, "Hey, why the frozen look? Tell him you are locked in." As she eagerly fired back her answer, Lucian knew he had hit the jackpot. His dad, the Grand Duke, did not just stumble in here. The big boss wanted a front-row seat to inspect the new recruits his kid had handpicked. It was like he showed up in the flesh just to give his son's first real flight a massive gust of wind. Archduke Sigmund crossed his arms. "If you are so damn sure, let's put it to the ultimate test." He marched straight out to the dirt of the training yard, barking at them to brace themselves for the holy sword. Lucian dropped into a smooth bow, hyping up his dad's blessing. Moments later, Eisen strolled onto the scene, stroking his beard, totally vibing with the intense setup. He smirked, pointing out that it was not just the third young master gracing the yard today, but the Lord himself. Sigmund brushed it off, claiming this was a huge milestone for the bloodline. And honestly, as a warrior, the suspense was just eating him alive. He gave the cold, hard order judge this girl to the absolute max. Zero holding back. Zero free passes just because she was Lucian's pick. Lucian totally agreed. "Go brutal," he insisted, "or else our whole deal means nothing." Eisen mentally logged that savage vibe, pivoting his intense gaze onto a shivering Felicia. "Since you are basically begging for it," he warned, "I am not pulling any punches." He closed the gap between them, and her heart practically hammered out of her chest. This dude was a legit holy sword. Just standing next to him, she felt the raw gravity of the room completely warp. Shaking, she bowed. "It is a massive honor to meet you, sir." She opened her mouth to drop her name, but he ruthlessly cut her off. "Names are useless," he grunted violently, slamming a wooden training sword straight into the floor with his crushing power. "Let your blade do the talking. We will do handshakes if you survive." His challenge. Rip that wooden blade out of the dirt. Lucian's eyes narrowed. The real gauntlet had just dropped. The master had channeled a ridiculous surge of mana right down to the tip of the wood, burying it deep into the solid ground, almost half a meter down. There was zero chance Felicia's raw muscle alone was going to yank that out. But if she tapped into her mana, it would slide out like butter. Still, there was a hidden trap in his test. Meanwhile, she gripped the hilt, her brain racing. No do-overs. I have got to nail this. Exactly like Philip would. If she just pooled her energy into her palms, she could win this. And just like that, she ripped the sword out without even breaking a sweat, on her very first yank. Her face totally lit up. Flashing a bright smile, she asked the swordmaster what the next drill was, but his face was absolutely stone cold. "We are done here," he muttered darkly. "Test over." Her jaw dropped. "Wait, what? Why?" she stammered. He scoffed, pointing out that her clueless expression proved she was totally blind to the reality. Baffled, she protested, "But I literally just pulled the sword out exactly like you ordered." He violently snatched her wrist. "The reason is glaringly obvious," he snapped. "Your internal mana circuits are an absolute wreck. because you have been skipping the circulation process like a coward to avoid the pain. The way you force that energy completely trashes your body's limits. It is the classic toxic habit of kids who coast on pure talent, he sneered. Just pure, reckless arrogance. Sure, the fact that a girl like her could even clash swords with a black lion proved she was gifted. But honestly, that raw skill would not erase her garbage work ethic. Does that clear things up for you? He mocked. Maybe actually listen to your instructor next time and take a hard look in the mirror. Step 1. Learn how to take a damn critique. Trembling, she confessed, "Sir, I have never even had the luxury of a real mentor. Honestly, I have absolutely zero clue what you are even talking about." Circulation Mana Control 1. I just sat on the sidelines watching my brother, trying my best to copy his moves. She dropped her head, desperately begging him to teach her from scratch. The master physically recoiled, stammering, "Are you seriously telling me? You figured all this out alone, just by watching? That is physically impossible. Look, you literally just weaponized mana to pull that blade." She frantically explained that she simply replayed the memories of her brother's sparring sessions and mirrored his technique. Every time that insane aura in his body started to surge, she whispered, I could physically sense the weight and the speed of his blade shifting. Aizen's brain completely short-circuited. What kind of absolute fever dream is this kid spitting? He visually tracking another person's internal mana flows with just the naked eye. Even a god-tier master like him could not pull that off. Zero physical touch whatsoever. Plus, sensing mana is basically like unlocking a secret sixth sense. How on earth was she supposed to just manifest it through sheer willpower alone? He shot Lucian a wild look, his shocked eyes silently screaming, "Wait, who the heck is this girl?" Meanwhile, Lucian just flashed a super smug, totally satisfied grin. After all, he did promise to bring him a literal prodigy, the ultimate living embodiment of the sword. Deciding to test the hype, the swordsman stepped up to see what she was actually made of in combat. He just stood there like a statue, totally unfazed, while she darted around him in a frantic blur, desperately hunting for the perfect opening to strike. Suddenly she lunged, basically teleporting behind him to unleash a vicious slash. But clank. Her weapon violently smashed right into his. Without missing a beat, her blade was completely dull, and her resolve was even weaker. This pathetic display was apparently all her absolute desperation could pull off. Gritting her teeth in absolute fury, she leaped backward, her body feeling insanely heavy. It was like her sword was an absolute joke to him. And the craziest part of it all, the legendary holy swordsman literally hadn't moved a single inch from his original spot. So, this was the absolute peak of combat. It was an insane, unbridgeable gap in power that she couldn't even wrap her head around right now. But no way was she just throwing in the towel. Snapping back into focus, she brutally carved a massive slab out of the stone floor, launched it straight into the air, and blitzed right toward the swordsman. Gently tapping the flying debris with the very tip of her blade, she locked in. Accelerate.